Got 24 in the chamber, so I think we've got 25. We're fine, I think. Very well, we continue with public business. The next item of public business is the draft Financial Services Jersey Amendment Law, lodged by the Minister of External Relations. Main respondent will be the Chair of the Economic and International Affairs Scrutiny Panel, and I ask the greffier to read the citation.
Draft Financial Services Jersey Amendment Law 2000, a law to amend the Financial Services Jersey Law 1998 in relation to consumer credit business. The States, subject to the sanction of His Most Excellent Majesty and Council, have adopted the following law.
Minister.
Thank you, sir. The draft Financial Services Jersey Amendment Law introduces a new class of business into the Financial Services Jersey Law 1998 to enhance consumer protections for borrowers. While I'm proposing the principles today, further work is ongoing to develop regulations and orders to ensure a comprehensive framework of measures is implemented concurrently with the draft law. The draft law proposes the creation of a new regulatory framework for consumer credit to respond to consumer harms whilst providing a proportionately clear licensing regime, guidance and oversight for those conducting consumer credit business. Government has consulted widely since 2023 and worked closely with key stakeholders to strike the right balance. The draft law proposes a two-tier framework whereby the JFSC will oversee an enhanced regime ensuring robust regulatory standards for high-risk or more complex activities referred to as consumer credit business in the law, and trading standards will oversee a basic regime covering lower-risk activities and smaller businesses, focusing on foundational consumer protections, collectively referred to as the wider consumer credit business in the law. The JFSC, of course, already supervises lenders under its anti-money laundering regime. However, the conduct and prudential regime introduced by the draft law is entirely separate from the AML regime. Certain activities which might otherwise fall within scope of the draft law are subject to specific exemptions. Those exempted will be subject to the basic consumer protections applicable to the wider consumer credit business unless specifically excluded. This wider consumer credit business will be the subject of regulations to be issued under the law. They are yet to be consulted on. The activities that will be in scope for the enhanced regulatory regime are lending, advising, credit brokering, debt adjusting, debt counselling and debt administration. Consumers are individuals in the law and no business lending is included. The types of credit covered by the law are consumer credit agreements, that's personal loans, hire purchase agreements, conditional sales agreements, secured lending arrangements over a consumer's primary residence in Jersey, pawnbroking, which will come in at a later date. As I have mentioned already, there will be exemptions from enhanced supervisory regime. Many of these exemptions are necessary as they are either the bread and butter work of Jersey's international finance industry and do not fall within the scope of what is intended to be court, i.e. they're not consumer focused and would make the jurisdiction anti-competitive. Or there is a risk that if the activity is caught, the enhanced supervisory framework would be disproportionate to the business size and the risk posed to consumers, resulting in an overly burdensome regime. The exemptions have been identified following close consultation with industry and the regulator over the past 3 years. It is expected that additional exemptions will be provided for in the secondary legislation and will include charities, credit broking without a fee, certain credit broking by car dealers and high street retailers, certain small-size credit brokers and security over primary residences for business loans and more. The basic consumer protections that apply to the category of the wider consumer credit business are expected to include, amongst other things, requirements around pre-contract disclosure to ensure transparency on the terms of consumer loans, restrictions around APR and total cost of credit, cooling off periods and a list of terms that may be unfair if included in a loan agreement or arrangement. Those activities that are expected to be excluded from the basic consumer protections will be those that have been excluded from the enhanced regime, predominantly because they are not consumer focused, as I've said, that's the work of the IFC, or where there is a specific policy reason for doing so. It is acknowledged that there may be resource pressure for trading standards in supervising adherence to the basic consumer protections. This has been noted, and I have met with the Minister to my left to discuss that further. Of course, in addition to these amendments to the Financial Services Law that are proposed, there are two consequential amendments, and they are proposed to ensure that the consumer credit regime is in line with modern day practices. So that's the 1880 law and the 1884 law, as I said, about pawnbroking, but that will be brought in later. I'd like to, before I close, extend my sincere thanks to the Economic and International Affairs Scrutiny Panel for their diligent scrutiny of this legislation. Their detailed analysis and thoughtful reflections on the public interest in the particulars of the consumer credit regime have been most welcome and helpful. Panel's work has contributed meaningfully to ensuring that the legislation is both proportionate and responsive to the needs of the island, and I propose the principles of the draft law. Thank you.
Shall the principle seconded? Yes. Very well. Does any member wish to speak on the principles? Deputy Taddy.
Thank you, sir. The Minister has quite clearly communicated the background to this law and its purpose in outlining the principles to this legislation, sir. So I'll limit my remarks perhaps to only a portion of my notes in front of me. So the panel would like to highlight the importance of effective promotion of the consumer credit regime to both lenders and consumers, and would expect the Government of Jersey to actively participate in the communication of the changes once implemented. And the panel has specifically recommended that the Government of Jersey actively participates in the communication of the consumer credit regime rights and responsibilities once this has been implemented. And the panel has also requested that the Minister outlines the plan for this communication during the debate of this draft law. So if he hasn't done it already, perhaps that's something he can do in the second or third reading, sir. So we also looked at resourcing for this piece of legislation. We were advised by the Minister that the JFSC has given him assurance that it will be resourced sufficiently and it will be able to do it once it's enacted, so it will be able to carry out its duties. Government officers have also further confirmed that any money from civil penalties can be used towards the JFSC reserves, but firstly they should go towards offsetting the cost of that particular sector from which the fines come, for example, consumer credit. Officers have also highlighted that along with the voluntary provisions, there is also a mechanism for ministerial order to enable monies to be paid to the Government of Jersey. The panel was advised of this in December 2024, that further work on how these would be apportioned would be undertaken. The panel does acknowledge that additional resources may be required by trading standards and anticipates that this would be fully communicated within the proposed budget that's coming up when lodged in this Assembly. I'll just move on to perhaps our conclusion, which is most of interest to members. The draft law establishes the legal framework to bring consumer credit within the scope of regulators, with secondary legislation anticipated to specify further details. The panel is broadly supportive of the draft law insofar as it introduces the mechanisms for the consumer credit regime into primary legislation. Sir, we have issued comments, so there are more details contained in our comments which I don't feel the need to expound on any further, but suffice to say we feel that we're comfortable with what the Minister is proposing, both the reasons for the proposal and of course some of it will need to be fleshed out later on in the process, but we are content to support this as a panel in the principles.
Very much. Does any other member wish to speak on the principles? Deputy Coles.
Thank you, sir. And I thank the Minister for bringing this forward in an atmosphere of regulation and red tape, which seems to be very frowned upon within this Assembly today. But all jokes aside, sir, I would like some clarity as to whether in future regulation that there will be the limiting of levels of APR may be applied to in things like payday loans, because we saw in the UK when these legitimate businesses came along offering like APRs of over like 1,000%, which can be quite damaging for people. They get themselves caught in a vicious cycle of having to borrow more money to pay back more loans. So I know that it won't be necessarily in this piece of legislation, but if it's going to come in future regulation, it would be good to have that assurance, sir.
Does any other member wish to speak on the principles? Deputy Joseph.
Thank you, sir. Sir, I welcome the Financial Services Amendment Law. This is as the Minister has said, and the panel who've done an excellent job, have done a long overdue amount in forwarding and delivering to the Assembly a robust and, if I may say, proportionate consumer credit regulation in Jersey. As the Minister who was involved at an earlier stage, I'm really pleased and would commend the Minister and his officials for what has been, I think, a realisation that the need of well-considered and carefully calibrated legislation. The law addresses a real gap. While many lending institutions in Jersey do adhere to voluntary standards, this law, I welcome the fact that it now brings legal clarity and enforceability with minimum protections. And this two-tier regulatory model, balancing the JFSC's responsibilities together with trading standards for lower risk lending, is both, if I may say, a pragmatic and a proportionate response to the issues I think that the previous speaker spoke about. I particularly support the laws including secured lending arrangements, what most of us would call, I guess, so as mortgages, perhaps relevant to the previous debate. It's undoubtedly mortgages being individuals' primary residence. That is a vital clarification, and I thank the Minister for ensuring that this is a narrowly targeted and excludes some of the other commercially based lending, which rightly fall outside this particular regime. The panel has also raised the question of mortgage coverage too. I think the important maybe for the Minister to, in his summing up, to say, and if I didn't hear him say anything about what the plans are for anything to do with the issue of mortgage lending, which may have been an issue in some people's mind, which has exacerbated the previous heady heights of the housing market with the arrival of a new lender that stretched the lending criteria, both loan to value, multiples of mortgages, etc. I note that this is, I don't think there's any plans, it's presumably excluded from the scope of it, but as we are dealing with the principles, it seems to me to be a valid question. What this law is about is consumer protection that upholds Jersey's reputation as a modern, responsible jurisdiction, and I hope the Minister will agree that as a result of the excellent work of the feedback and the team within financial services has done, their outreach has seen, I've only seen a bit of it, but the panel looked at it, there is really I think going to be a message of confidence and certainty set out, giving firms clear guidance, and for those, with those remarks, so I congratulate the Minister and the team and urge members to support the principles of it.
Very much, Deputy Miller.
Thank you, sir. I would also just like to speak in support of this proposition. It's something that I feel very, very strongly about, that we should introduce a degree of consumer protection into lending. As Deputy Coles quite rightly says, it is introducing a new element of regulation in certain sectors. It won't trouble the banks, it won't trouble many of our larger lenders because they are already operating to standards that exist in their home jurisdictions, for many of which that is the UK. But it is absolutely essential that we have this. And if I could just add some colour around this. In a previous role between 2013 and 2015, I was involved for almost all of that period doing some work which involved the move in the UK from of Consumer Credit moved from the Office of Fair Trading to the Financial Conduct Authority. And I learned quite a lot at that time about consumer credit regulation in the UK. And the source code, the regulatory manual, which goes under the title of CONK, C-O-N-K. And there was a consultation, and just to pick up on Deputy Cole's point, and I was going to refer to this morning, had our debate on the residential tenancy continued. Part of that consultation was indeed a proposal to put a limit on the amount of interest that could be charged. And actually the industry opposed that because they said, and I think this was quite right, that if you put a limit, a cap very quickly becomes a floor. And if you say to a lender, you cannot charge more than 30%, very quickly, virtually every lender will be charging not 20%, not 18%, but 30%. They will charge to the maximum. And the industry rejected that. Deputy Coles is also quite right that without this legislation, in years gone past, in fact, probably even now, the payday lenders, the Wongas of the world, could have set up in King Street, and provided they did their anti-money laundering checks, nobody would have done anything about it or could have done anything about it. I congratulate the team for devising a system that is not following the UK, because the UK legislation is horribly prescriptive. Even banks and building societies have fallen foul of it. And they've had huge exercise. They've had to do restitution exercises, is that the word? Where they give people back money that they have inadvertently wrongfully charged in interest. But just to give some examples, some of the key themes in the UK, and I would imagine these will follow through in our own codes of practice, are about treating customers fairly. And that doesn't just mean treating them fairly, it means treating them with dignity and respect. And that led to quite a lot of debate in the bank I was working with at the time, because it means that in the UK, you cannot send a debt collector round with a van and a jacket written on the back, Acme Debt Collectors Limited. You have to respect people's privacy, not to have their financial difficulties made public. You should not send them letters with big red letters saying final demand stamped on them. We don't have those rules, and they are important that people are treated with respect, particularly in the debt collection area, which I know will follow at a later date. But there's other things, such as not persuading people to borrow more money than they need. And probably because I know what happens there, I regularly shout at the radio when I drive in the morning, because a few years ago there was a shop in town who thought it was acceptable to run a series of adverts clearly aimed at young men, telling them that it was absolutely fine if they didn't get a bonus and they spent all the money they earned going out, because they could borrow money from the shop to buy designer jeans and designer trainers to go out on a Saturday night. It didn't matter if they didn't have any money, they could borrow. That is clearly wrong. That shop is no longer trading, I believe. But there are also levels of advertising in Jersey that wouldn't be acceptable. You know, the advert, and I'm sure you've all heard it, oh, we can't have a family holiday this year. Oh, we've just had 2 weeks in Mauritius. Borrow the money for it. One of the things I learned in my banking days, ironically, is that holiday loans are the ones that are most likely to be defaulted on, because people go on holiday, they come back, they've forgotten about it for a few weeks, and then they kind of forget about repaying the loan. So the whole principle of not pushing debt on people is something that is important. The debt companies hopefully will learn to live with that. Yes, people may want to borrow for a holiday, but if their means stretch to a week in Spain, that is different from stretching to 3 weeks in Mauritius or the Maldives or any. So it's not telling people to borrow more money than they can afford. I've spoken to lots of politicians over the years about this, about the need for it, and I really am pleased that this is coming forward now. I don't like to use, I think we use the word vulnerable far too many times, but people who don't have money and who do need to borrow are in a weaker position than those who have money. We protect people with bank deposits, with trusts, with investments, And it really is time that we created a layer of protection for people who need to borrow and who also need to be protected from unscrupulous lenders. So I really would just like to get all that off my chest and encourage members to vote for this long overdue piece of law. Thank you.
Very much, Deputies. Any other member wish to speak on the principles? If no other member wishes to speak, then I close the debate and call upon the Minister to respond.
Thank you, sir. Members are probably wondering why I didn't ask the Assistant Minister to take this piece of legislation. That's simply because she is going to take the next one. I didn't want her to overburden her during the course of the day. I thank again the chair of the scrutiny panel. Members will have seen the comments that scrutiny circulated, and I know they won't have had time to read yet, but the email that I then circulated yesterday at lunchtime addressing those questions which scrutiny raised in the hope that we could ensure that we didn't need to spend hours on this debate because they can be dealt with by that circulation. And of course I thank Senator Ozef, Deputy Ozef, sorry, for his intervention. That wasn't a slip of the tongue. He's been very clear that he will remain in St Saviour. For two Deputy Ozef who, when he was in office, was party to bringing forward this work as well, and then was ably followed on by Deputy Miller. And he is right around mortgages. Of course, it doesn't cover buy-to-lets, it just covers mortgages for primary residences. And it is about fairness, but it's also about being clear what the terms mean in everyday parlance, not just in financial jargon. So we will get to that point. There's more consultation to be done. When Deputy Coles raised an important point about APR, and this really ties in with what the scrutiny panel said to us about communication. And communication will also require, I think, financial education, because it's very easy for islanders to look at one rate of interest and not fully understand what the compounded rate of interest will actually be and what it will really mean over the lifetime of the loan. This is tied in again with Deputy Miller's point about holiday lending. Holiday lending that lasts a big amount which lasts you for 2 weeks, but then you're having to pay it back over 12 months. Means that you are automatically entering into a financial difficult situation for you and your family, because in 12 months or 24 months' time, you want to go on holiday again. So you are building up those things. So it is about, one, the regulation, the two-tier regulation, which we think is appropriate, but it's also in due course thinking about those fair terms and conditions and being absolutely clear about it. So on that note, I maintain the principles of this piece of legislation and I call for the appel. Thank you.
Very much. So the appel is called for. I invite members to return to their seats. The vote is on the principles of P41, Draft Financial Services Amendment Law. I ask the greffier to open the voting and members to vote. If members have had the opportunity of casting their votes, then I ask the greffier to close the voting. The principles have been adopted. 41 votes pour, no votes contra, no abstentions. Deputy Talley, I'm assuming your scrutiny panel doesn't wish to carry the matter in?
What do we think? No, sir. I think we're okay. If you'd have asked me this morning, I might have changed my mind, but no, we don't, sir.
Well, how do you wish to deal with the matter in second reading, Minister?
I'll take it on block. I'll just apologise to members. So I was chatting to the Chief Minister and I forgot to vote. So I shall try to correct that in the second and third reading.
If only that had happened an hour ago, sir.
In the legislation. Part one, as we say, amends the financial services law, and it introduces a new definition of consumer credit business. Article 4 empowers the states to make consumer protection regulations and debt collection regulations, and we've already spoken about. Articles 5 and 6 define the scope of regulated activities set out in exemptions. Article 7 makes procedural amendments linked to implementation, commencement and transitional provisions consistent with the law's structure. The second part, Article 8, as I said, updates the 1880 law and deals with a long standing unfairness in dégrèvement arrangements. Article 9 is the pawnbroking law, and that repeals that. Article 10 is just consequential, and Article 11 deals with the citation and commencement, and I commend them en bloc, sir.
Are they seconded en bloc?
Yes, sir.
Does any member wish to speak on the articles or any of them? If no member wishes to speak, those in favour of adopting the articles kindly.
May I have the appel, sir, please?
Yes. The appel is called for. I invite members to return to their seats. And I ask the greffier to open the voting. And if members have had the opportunity of casting their votes, then I ask the greffier to close the voting.
Sir, the connotables.
Excuse me, sir, my buttons keep flashing, notwithstanding that I've pushed one of them.
Right.
They're still flashing now, sir.
Does the record show the connotables having voted? No. Well, do you wish to indicate a vote verbally then in that case?
Yes, please, sir, I voted for.
And then if members have had the opportunity of casting their vote, I ask the greffier to close the voting. The articles have been adopted in second reading, 45 votes for, no votes contra, no abstentions. Do you propose in third reading, Minister?
If I may, sir, and of course I reiterate my thanks to the scrutiny panel, and we look forward to continuing to work with them as we do further consultation and bring forward subsequent amendments. I'd also, sir, don't often get the opportunity to do this, but Deputy Joseph did so in his speech, like to thank my officials who have painstakingly delivered a piece of legislation and a framework which in other places not too far from here caused a great deal of pain, but because of their diplomacy, their grasp of detail, their understanding of the issues, they have delivered to the Assembly today a piece of legislation with the broadest possible support, and those in industry who are affected feel that they have understood the issues and they've responded accordingly and appropriately and proportionately. So they are sitting in the gallery, sir, those officials, so members will be able to see them there, but I wish to place on record my thanks for the years of work that they have put in place, boring and laborious most of the time. Sadly, sir, the work for them is not over. They'll have another couple of years at least, probably bringing the remainder to fruition, but I'd like to thank them nonetheless on behalf of the Assembly, sir. And I maintain the law in third reading.
Very much. Is the law seconded for third reading? Does any member wish to speak in third reading? Deputy Joseph.
Very briefly, sir, I wonder whether the Minister, and forgive me if I've not read every bit of it, but would he give a very brief outline of what the next stages are, having now approved this and hopefully getting it passed through the third reading? Because obviously there is a massive consumer interest in this, expressed ably by the Treasury Minister, about some of the real issues that this is going to solve in a way that I agree that, as the Minister has said, in a very pragmatic and Jersey right-sized approach, which is impressive actually. But could he give an indication, because we won't get to that wonderful place where we can have that proportionate regulation, and is there any order that the Minister is going to be bringing the future stuff in very high level? Thank you, sir.
Does any other member wish to speak in third reading? Deputy Tadier.
Thanks, sir. Just to make a comment, that a reason that a lot of this is important is that, it's just an observation, is that members will be aware of somebody called Martin Lewis, who exists in the UK and has got a TV programme, he's got his website, and it's something which is very helpful, I think, to people, consumers, in the UK. Some of that is useful to residents in the Channel Islands, but of course a lot of it isn't necessarily. And in the absence of anything that exists like that, I mean, of course, we do have the Jersey Consumer Council, who do a very good job, but they really are focused primarily on retail, and they have lesser resources. So I think it's important that in this legislation that education is built into it, and I think that's a job perhaps not entirely for government but for the sector itself, and I think there's perhaps arguably a gap there and a niche for, I don't know if somebody could fulfil that, maybe a retired politician after the next election. I'm not looking at anyone in particular. Like Deputy Gorst, even though we're on different sides of the table when it comes to scrutiny and ministerial, one obviously becomes aware of the great deal of work that goes in from the officers who do give up their time to brief our panel, and indeed from our panel members and our officers as well. So I'd like to just put on record our thanks to all those involved for looking at these in some detail.
Thank you, Deputy. Deputy Luce.
Thank you, sir. I don't think it would be right if I didn't just say a very few words. Deputy Joseph is quite right. There may be an enormous amount of work that comes out of this. And I just want to repeat something I said this morning, was this is another piece of regulation which will fall to my regulation department. And in this case, it will be trading standards officers who are already working very hard and pretty much at full capacity. Deputy Gorst and I have had discussions about this, but I just want to alert the Assembly, as I say it again, more laws, more regulation, more work for one department, and we will be looking for some help in this regard sometime in the future. Thank you, sir.
Very much. Does any other member wish to speak in third reading? If no other member wishes to speak in third reading, I close the debate and call upon the Minister to respond.
Thank you, sir. Just picking up on the comments of my colleague Minister, we have had a discussion about the potential for a need for further resource within trading standards. I absolutely do think that trading standards is the right body to deal with that second layer of approaching consumer regulation, and I can't think there would be anybody else. It would be inappropriate for the JFSC to deal with that, because his officials in trading standards, from all I know of them, is that they are relatively pragmatic and reasonable and really want to look to get something sorted rather than coming with a big stick. That's not always the case with regulators. It does occur to me that it was a good idea to put all of these regulatory things into one regulatory body, but that means they can easily be forgotten by departments. And if departments that need regulation perhaps had a requirement to allocate some resources from their departmental budget into the regulatory department, that would be a way of solving the problem that he now finds himself with, because he gets lumbered with regulatory laws but with no compensatory money to deal with it. But the reason that we can be continue to support this legislation today, even in light of that, is that the law we're due to bring it back to the Assembly. Those secondary bits will come into effect from first quarter of next year, but there'll be a 12-month transition to allow everybody to be prepared for it. And it might be that the Minister needs to come back within that 12-month transition and require further funding. So Deputy Joseph asked a very good question about where are we going from here. The secondary legislative consultation will be published next month, so that might stimulate members' appetite and interest, even though it will no doubt be extremely technical. And we aim then to debate the regulations by the end of this year. As well, I think that's right. The JFSC codes, which are to be consulted upon, will be consulted upon simultaneously with bringing forward those regs. The Deputy Terrier made an interesting point, which I think really is picking up on financial education and people like Martin Lewis in the UK. And I think it's incumbent upon us all to think more about, from a family perspective, how we educate our own families about the decisions that families make about financing, taking a mortgage, renting a property, having a credit card, using the bank account, having an overdraft. All of those things, we can often think it's the responsibility of the other Deputy Ward here and his department. The reality is, of course that's important. The reality is that it's the responsibility of all of us to educate our families about these things in real time. Of course, in Jersey we do have the Ombudsman, so there are certain areas that islanders can go to with the Ombudsman, and as Deputy Terrier said, there's the Consumer Council and there's trading standards. So I'll conclude my remarks there, and I maintain the regulations, the legislation in third reading, and I call for the appel, please.
Thank you very much, Minister. The appel is called for. I invite members to return to their seats. The vote is on P41 in third reading, and I ask the greffier to open the voting. If members have had the opportunity of casting their vote, then I ask the greffier to close the voting. The law is adopted in third reading, 45 votes pour, no votes contre, no abstentions. Very well, we now come to the draft Bank Recovery and Resolution Jersey Amendment Law lodged by the Minister for External Relations. The main respondent is the Chair of the Economic and International Affairs Scrutiny Panel, and I ask the greffier to read the citation.
Draft Bank Recovery and Resolution Jersey Amendment Law 2000, a law to amend the Bank Recovery and Resolution Jersey Law 2017 to provide for the continuation of the Bank Depositors Compensation Scheme and to provide for the transfer of functions to the authority for the administration of that scheme. The states, subject to the sanction of His Most Excellent Majesty and Council, have adopted the following law.
Yes.
Thank you, sir. Sir, I think I have a reasonably lengthy speech here, but I think as many members may not be familiar with Bank Recovery and Resolution or the Deposit Compensation Scheme, it is worthwhile giving a little background. So I am here to discuss today the principles of the draft Bank Recovery and Resolution Jersey Amendment Law, which I will call the draft law. Jersey is proud to be a premier host to reputable and successful international banks and has to date never experienced bank failure. However, this strong track record should not be taken for granted. The draft law marks a further step in strengthening the island's ability to prepare for and respond to the risk of bank failure. This represents continued progress in the development of our contingency and crisis planning. It builds on the progress already achieved through the establishment of the Jersey Resolution Authority under the Bank Recovery and Resolution Jersey Law 2017, which I will refer to as the Resolution Law. The Resolution Authority is an independent body responsible for operating Jersey's bank resolution framework. This framework enables early intervention in the event of a bank showing signs of distress, helping to ensure continuity of critical services and safeguarding financial stability. The primary aim of the draft law is to transfer responsibility for administering Jersey's depositor compensation scheme to the Resolution Authority and from the Deposit Compensation Scheme Board, creating a single centralised body to manage bank failures. In a crisis where speed and efficiency are essential, having one clearly designated authority will help ensure a faster and more coordinated response. This reform also supports the government's broader objective of streamlining public administration and reducing unnecessary duplication across public bodies. Members will no doubt recall the events of 2008, which saw a global crisis which unfolded following the collapse of some banks and consequently the run on deposits from those banks. This necessitated government intervention in some countries to bail out banks and ensure the continuation of the entire financial system. Jersey did have branches or subsidiaries of banks that had run into difficulties overseas. However, we did not have direct issues on island. These events led to considerable developments internationally of frameworks to promote financial stability and provide depositors with relevant protections through compensation schemes, capital adequacy requirements, and later resolution models. In Jersey, we first delivered the compensation scheme through the Banking Business Depositors Compensation Jersey Regulations 2009 and subsequently the Resolution Framework through the Resolution Law. The Resolution Framework is designed to reduce the reliance of large banks, those historically considered too big to fail, on government bailouts. A resolution action is a regulatory measure that restructures a failing institution to maintain financial stability and avoid the need for public support. Ideally, this allows the bank to continue operating functions which are critical to the island and also, crucially, avoids that bank becoming insolvent and going into real collapse. Jersey's banking sector is composed of subsidiaries and branches of major international institutions. Accordingly, our legal framework is designed to support resolution action led by foreign authorities, while also equipping us with the necessary tools to manage the resolution of a locally incorporated bank should the need arise. Notably, approximately 93% of bank deposits in Jersey are held with institutions which are subject to resolution plans under other established authorities, such as the Bank of England. These deposits are protected through mechanisms like bail-in, which are designed to maintain continuity of banking services. As a result, the use of Jersey's local depositor compensation scheme is expected to be limited, applying primarily in cases where a bank is not covered by a resolution plan, either locally or overseas. While these developments are important tools in Jersey's response to the risk of bank failure, and we believe the risk of occurrence of that to be relatively low, the current delivery of the compensation scheme and bank resolution by two separate bodies, though a product of the phased evolution of our framework, is neither necessary nor proportionate for a jurisdiction of our size. Today's draft law will mark the next phase in the development of Jersey's response. The law will, firstly, transfer the Depositors' Compensation Scheme to the Jersey Resolution Authority. It will enhance the provisions for administration of the scheme to allow for a more modern and effective delivery, and it will make necessary adjustments to the resolution law to enable the Jersey Resolution Authority to continue its work on the resolution framework. If I now move to the specific amendments in the proposition. The draft law has a number of elements. Firstly, it proposes to transfer and continue the Depositors' Compensation Scheme, originally established under the Depositors Compensation Regulations, into the framework of the Resolution Law. Under this new structure, the scheme will be administered by the Resolution Authority. Consequently, we plan to wind down the Jersey Bank Depositors Compensation Board, and by that I just mean the administering authority, over the 3-month period following the transfer, with a formal dissolution of the board scheduled for the end of March 2026. Second, the draft law introduces a series of important enhancements to the scheme. It will enable faster timeframes for initial compensation payouts, recognising the urgency with which depositors may need access to their funds. The legislation will remove the existing requirement for depositors to submit applications for compensation, allowing the authority to process payments based on information provided by the bank. This will benefit depositors because they will receive payments directly by the authority and from the authority and will not have to take any steps themselves to claim compensation. There will be more flexible activation criteria, and the trigger mechanism for the scheme will be amended to give the authority greater discretion in determining when to activate it. This reflects the diversity of insolvency practices internationally and allows for alternative resolution and recovery strategies where appropriate. The current limit of £100 million on total compensation payouts will be lifted. In cases where total compensation exceeds £100 million, the authority will be empowered to recover funds through liquidation of the bank in order to make subsequent payments to depositors. And finally, there will be orderly scheme wind-up provisions. Clear expectations will be set for the timely and structured completion of the compensation process, including provisions for the formal winding up of the scheme in due course. Thirdly, and in addition to the Depositors' Compensation Scheme, the draft law also introduces targeted amendments to the Resolution Law. These changes will support the continued implementation of resolution policies by the authority and ensure that Jersey's legal framework remains aligned with evolving international standards. This draft law has been informed by extensive stakeholder engagement. Formal consultations were conducted in Q1 and Q4 of 2024, supported by further discussions with banking and insolvency professionals. In addition, there has been ongoing engagement with the Jersey Resolution Authority and the current Deposit Compensation Scheme Board. This collaborative approach has helped shape both the legislation itself and the plans for its implementation. At this point, I would like to highlight to members the specific scope of this draft law when it comes to this compensation scheme. From the outset, our focus has been on improving the delivery and administration of the scheme and changes that are designed to enhance its effectiveness. We have not proposed adjustments to the scheme's core parameters, such as the compensation limit, bank levies, and the scope of those eligible for compensation, as further analysis is needed to determine whether such changes would meaningfully strengthen Jersey's financial safety net. Government recognises the growing interest in reviewing the compensation limits which were originally set in 2009. It's important to note that depositors with balances exceeding £50,000 still retain the right to pursue the excess amount through the bank's liquidation process. More recently, our focus has been on establishing a robust resolution framework. Importantly, resolution offers more proactive and relevant protections for islanders in the event of a bank showing signs of failure, with a focus on preserving the critical services. And by that I mean that it will aim to keep the bank trading and operational so that the risk of deposits not being available is considerably diminished. Basically, it's seeking to save banks and prevent them going into insolvency. While Jersey's current compensation limits remain aligned with those of comparable jurisdictions, such as Guernsey and the Isle of Man, we acknowledge the value of reviewing these limits. Such a review will be considered once this phase of work is complete and the authority has had sufficient time to embed its new responsibilities. This is anticipated to be toward the end of next year. I would like to extend my sincere thanks and those of the Minister to the Economic and International Affairs Scrutiny Panel for their diligent scrutiny of this legislation. Their detailed analysis and thoughtful reflections on the public interest in the particulars of the scheme have been most welcome. These reflections align with the Government's intention to review those elements following the completion of this phase of work. The panel's work has contributed meaningfully to ensuring that the legislation is both robust and responsive to the needs of the island. Sir, I move the principles of this law. Thank you.
Very much. Are the principles seconded?
Yes, sir.
Does any member wish to speak on the principles? Deputy Alex Curtis.
Thank you, sir. And I think there's not only large-scale contentious stuff, but having read the report and the EIA's panel comments, there's a lot to be welcomed here. I understand the Minister highlighting the scope of the current work around the scope of the deposit compensation scheme, including both its remit of who it affects, but also the quantum. And I just wonder if the Minister, in her summing up on the principles, could elaborate a little further than she did in her opening remarks, just around why it wasn't felt the scope could have been wider at this point in time. I know that there was obviously draft work underway in 2016. The law was largely unamended since 2009, and that the EIA panel note that we have fallen, I think, over 60%, or inflation is 67% compared to when the original law came in. So notwithstanding the commitments, I think it would be just helpful to have a little flesh out kind of the risk reward in both including that, which wasn't included now, and also a bit more on those commitments as to how she intends to review that in the future. That was all there.
Right. Does any other member wish to speak on the principles? No other member wish. Deputy Terrier.
Thank you, sir. So the scrutiny panel has started to look at this. We've issued a comments paper, and broadly speaking, so I won't read through all my notes, but I'll make some conclusion remarks, but also refer to, I think, the important matter which Deputy Alex Curtis has raised, sir. So essentially, I won't reiterate everything that the Minister has said in moving this, because I think she's outlined the reason for the moving this powers to the JRA and also the rationale more widely. I'll just highlight a couple of points. So the panel is in agreement with the removal of the £100 million cap of the total compensation offered, noting the mixed method of funding through the States of Jersey loan and a levy on banks that sets out to protect public finances whilst providing provision for funding of the scheme. And the panel also notes the continuing provision allowing for the discretion of the JRA to administrate distribution of the compensation under the limit of contribution, and believes that this is a sensible measure that will allow fair distribution of funds no matter the set limit of compensation without undue burden upon banks and public finances. The panel also accepts the rationale for the transfer of the functions of the Jersey Bank Depositor Compensation Board to the Jersey Resolution Authority, so the JRA, and the provisions in the draft law. So I turn the panel's attention now to the issue, which may be seen as a small issue in the grand scheme of things, but one which we consider is quite fundamental, because this talks about your average saver, I suppose. So this is talking about Jersey residents, perhaps, or Jersey customers who have bank accounts in Jersey are currently, as we know, protected up to the limit of £50,000. The panel is disappointed that the opportunity to review and update the limit of compensation has not been undertaken at this point. There has been an acknowledgement from stakeholders and the Minister that the figure of £50,000 should be reviewed or increased. There's been an indication that this should take place following the transfer of functions of the DCS board to the JRA, as we've just heard from the Minister. And the panel notes that this leaves savers in Jersey at a relative disadvantage to their counterparts in other jurisdictions, in neighbouring jurisdictions, including the UK, Europe and Gibraltar. So the panel has considered further action on this point. However, at this point, however, we will support the principles. And we do address that in our comments. So just to put this in perspective, we know that the scheme was set up in 2009. It's the 2009 regulations. And at that point, the limit was set at £50,000. Already at that point, the UK had moved to increase their limit up to £85,000. So that's already, what are we, some 16 years ago. And as Deputy Curtis has quite rightly referred to, the estimated RPI compounded for that period is 67%, which, interestingly enough, if it were, if the £50,000 had been uprated either year on year or for that period, it would bring us to about £83,500. So the 85,000 limit is really, I think, the bare minimum that Jersey savers should be expecting to receive. We note that also in the EU, it's 100,000 euros, which is perhaps not too far off the £85,000, and that in the UK they're proposing to move it to £110,000. So whilst there were some mixed responses when we made some initial inquiries with stakeholders about that limit, we did get some responses, and I think, as I mentioned earlier, the Consumer Council that exists in Jersey is perhaps one of the few, if you like, imperfect, I suppose, organisations when it comes to financial advice, but they do what they can and they do a great job, I think. They said that the Consumer Council believes that as Jersey's main big income earner remains the finance industry, it's essential that Jersey remains competitive and up to date, and especially that it is viewed by international investors as competitive, up to date, and that perception is everything. As such, the Consumer Council believe that in order to maintain a continuing level of confidence, the limit should rise to a minimum of the UK's £85,000, if not perhaps even higher. And the island states in its press that only the very best banking institutions are granted a licence, and therefore we believe that to sit down and do nothing would send out the wrong signals. Now, we know, of course, that the Minister isn't saying that they should do nothing. They're saying simply wait. The concern here is that an opportunity has been lost not to do anything in this particular set of changes that are coming forward. And, of course, saying that something will be introduced at the end of next year is, of course, a promise that no minister here can make, because no minister knows whether they'll be re-elected. None of us knows if we will be re-elected or who the ministers will be. So I think as a panel, we do feel that this is a lost opportunity, and it might be an opportunity, there might be an opportunity still after the principles have been, I'm sure, voted on and supported for an amendment to take place in that regard.
Deputy Joseph.
Thank you. Thank you, sir. I was looking in a bedroom of a relative, and I was described once by a journalist from the JEP as an out-of-box DJ with my light going on, and I don't want to take up members' time, but however, because on issues that were important, I'm not an out-of-work DJ, so I'm rising to support this amendment law because I think it is important that there are evolutionary and proper changes that strengthens Jersey's ability to respond to risks, as the Assistant Minister has said. There were some members of this Assembly who will remember well the original setting up of this compensation scheme, and in 2009, and the later development of the Bank Recovery and Resolution regime. Unlike other jurisdictions, as the Assistant Minister has quite rightly said, and I hesitate to say it, but I don't think that Jersey has seen, as a result of the good work by members of this Assembly with fantastic individuals like the late, great Colin Powell, and other of the esteemed regulators that we have, had some pretty broad, simple approaches to the way we did licensed banks. And that meant that we did not have a Landsbankie in Jersey. We did not have any of those Icelandic banks and others that were in a place that wasn't not very far from here. And there was genuine turmoil in markets at the time. I'm not casting any aspersions on the Icelandic economy, but when the full effects of the world financial crisis attacked some institutions, even that one would have regarded as probably too big to fail, they failed. And we then had to bring in, and the 100 million scheme was a policy response, despite the fact that at the time it was said, and ministers defended it, and I defended it, that I thought that the regulatory approach, albeit very unpopular, albeit that it was top 500 banks, and it has certainly changed on, and I absolutely welcome the work that has been done on the way. I may be slightly too growth orientated in terms of wanting to get growth, but it's all part of the competitiveness and other things that are being done by the ministers at the moment and the officials, where we're getting back to that harmonious relationship between the JFSC government and the industry. And I would say that Deputy Tadier and the panel, who've done a very thoughtful job, and he is reserving his positions after the principles, which is his absolute right. First of all, the consolidation of the depositor compensation scheme and the resolution authority into a single centralised framework is absolutely right. And I'm pleased that the ministers have progressed that. It's taken quite some time, which goes to speak to the complexity with all the other things that they're doing, but they're quite right in merging these functions in single authority. It's a logical and proportionate Jersey-sized approach for a jurisdiction of our size. I also welcome very warmly the provisions for a faster payout in that event. Straight-through processing and automatic vesting of claims, all absolutely the right thing, and in line with Jersey's reputation of international best practice, and it also is the core principles of those bodies that members are probably not interested in the acronyms, but the International Association of Deposit Insurers, etc. These are all really important issues, which I know the officials and ministers are seized upon and the panel when they're actually looking at it, because it's really important stuff. And it is the bread and butter of the very essence of why Jersey has been a strong market-based economy, where we've got most of the economic growth in the last 20, 30, 40 years. And it's really important that we get this stuff right. So I do not apologise for putting my light on and speaking. My question respectfully to the Assistant Minister is this issue. She said in her remarks, I think, that there was a removal of the 100 million cap on the compensation scheme. I think that's partly correct, but it may, and I seek clarification. For the benefit of the Assembly and other members of the public who may be listening, while the cap on total payout to depositors has indeed been removed, the cap on the amount that they may, and she did explain this, be raised through bank levies still remains in place under Article 142 ZF. Likewise, the 100 million cap on states' loan facilities to support liquidity of the scheme is also retained. And for the avoidance of doubt, that is a mortgage, that is a charge on our strategic reserve. It was very controversial at the time. The strategic reserve has been a no don't touch it for years, quite rightly, under Colin Powell's and the late Reginald Ronald who created it. And it was don't touch it and don't take the interest from it. And when we brought the proposal that we would basically use some of the strategic reserve to underpin what we hoped and then didn't happen, was a no failure of a bank, thanks to the wise and prudential oversight of the JFSC and all those people that were in at the time. Jersey was insulated by its own proper decision-making from the collapse that had wrecked other places and wreaked turmoil to ordinary working people, not just in the finance industry, but beyond. So this stuff might be not as interesting to members as the residential tenancy law, but it really matters to get this stuff right. And so I absolutely also am of the opinion that despite I think, robust and continuing, although more competitive and pragmatic way that we're now regulating, we did away with the top 500 rule years ago, there is a need to signal to depositors who now are in a transfer of information situation globally, where the information exchange between tax authorities and beneficial ownership registers, all the rest of it. They are also maybe, and the Assistant Minister can comment, they may be further reassured if one is confident about one's regulatory approach. One is going to want to put in place one's not going to be worried about effectively the level of depositor potentially compensation that one would get, because one knows that one's banks are, or those within this jurisdiction that is regulated, are not going to, the amount's not going to be called upon. And so I think that there is every good question to ask about the rising of the limit. The chair of the panel was quite right to say, I would argue potentially that he needs to use RPIX rather than RPI, which is maybe gives us a different figure about the evolution of inflation since. But he's quite right, and Deputy Curtis was, about the value of that depositor compensation in the light of today's value of what the Jersey pound in Jersey, or the UK sterling pound, is worth in Jersey. This compensation amount is not. It's withered on the vine. And I've rose in this assembly saying lots of things about inflation. That's why I worry about it. Inflation eats away. It's the hidden tax. And so our depositor scheme limit is out with what others have got. And so I just ask in closing, whilst I absolutely commend the ministers and the Assistant Minister particularly, and all the officials and the regulators and all the people who've done it, and thanking the individuals who've been on a standby basis that have actually acted in a role that this Assembly is appointed to be the depositor compensation scheme, to be that authority. There's been quite a lot of people, and we owe a debt of gratitude to those people who've stood by to be ready in the unfortunate event that something would happen, and they've had to be seized upon all the issues and be ready to act. And putting them in one-stop shop is absolutely right. And so in saying all of that, I do ask, in wanting to support, in actually going to support anyway, of course, the principles, I do ask the Minister whether she would be kind enough to comment on the issue of the actual limits. It may be something that we'll deal with later. And also this question of the 100 million. It's going as a charge on the strategic reserve. That's not a message to other ministers so that they can spend it. But it is going to necessarily be not the states that's going to bail it out, but it's going to be a further charge that will be covered by a levy. I wonder whether the Minister understands my question, because is the 100 million mortgage that the states had to make available in the event of a bank collapse still going to be a charge to the states, or is it going to be a charge on the remaining banks that are standing after the event that a Herculean thing? I think it's quite important because it mattered at the time. I know I had to fight my way through the Assembly. Thank you, sir.
Thank you very much. Does the member wish to speak on the principles? Senator Harbison Lawrence.
Thank you, sir. I got a bit confused listening to Deputy Oseph's speech, and I'm not sure whether ultimately he was asking, as I now intend to ask, why was the decision made to not increase from 50 to 85,000 pounds the recovery amount in the event of a loss of a bank collapsing? I always thought the 50 was too low. We know it's difficult to open bank accounts over here, so as soon as someone reaches the 50 and above, you know, and they may want to split amounts between banks and have difficulty in managing that. So just for me, in layman's terms, please, the Consumer Council is querying it. Why was the decision taken to not take the opportunity to increase the amount from 50 to 85. Thank you.
Does any other member wish to speak on the principles? If no other member wishes to speak on the principles, then I close the debate and call upon the Minister to respond.
Thank you, sir. Sir, I think the Constable of St Lawrence's question is broadly the same as the one that Deputy Taddy has asked from the scrutiny panel, and Deputy Joseph has raised a slightly different question. This work has really focused on improvements to the scheme itself, to the operation, things that we know will improve the efficiency and effectiveness of the operation of the scheme if it was ever called on. Increasing the limit sounds like a very straightforward thing to do, and it absolutely isn't. It would require a huge amount of work, it would require a huge amount of consultation, and it's not just as simple as, the piece of work isn't just as simple as putting the compensation limit up from 50,000 to another number. Because things that we have to think about are A, what is an effective compensation limit? Which are the eligible deposits that are covered? Because we do have to remember that of the depositors in Jersey, very, very significant numbers are people who do not live on island. And for many of them, £50,000 is a drop in the ocean. But they at present are also, a very small drop in the ocean, they at present are also covered by this deposit compensation scheme, which going way, way back to the late, the 2008-2009 period was one of the things when I was involved in very early consultations was something that caused me some concern. If we're sending out cheques to very rich people in the Middle East, and people locally are not getting the money, that is a difficult political position. So there is a big question to be had there. That's purely my opinion. It's not government policy. It's not up for debate as yet. Secondly, we also have to look at how the scheme is funded. So if we increase the amount of the protection at the moment, and not everything is appropriate for index linking, we have to think about who pays for that. So do we then have to go to the bank? People are suggesting, increasing it by very significant amounts, 60 to 100%. That would mean very significantly more money having to be requested by the banks, and we have to then ask the banks to agree to provide that funding. We also have the question of states funding. So, which I think was Deputy Joseph's question. As I understand it, the scheme is still funded by way of bank levies, so the banks will still pay a levy to the scheme if it was called on. And I think we really do have to remember that this is a contingency in the event of a worst case scenario. We haven't had a bank collapse in Jersey. With the Silicon Valley Bank in the States, it does happen because there are in other jurisdictions, we have small private banks that are less stable than the banks we have in Jersey. Our banks are subsidiaries or branches of large global institutions, which should give us all some comfort. And I think it's also worth remembering that for the vast majority of people in Jersey, there are only really 4 or 5 banks where they will have their money. Although there are other banks, those banks are focused on private wealth, those banks are focused on people who have very significant amounts of money to invest and manage. So in terms of local residents, they are likely to be banking with a very small number of very stable banks, we would hope. So the banks will have to pay, so we have to consider the position of the banks and how much we're asking for from the banks, because what we also don't want to do is increase the cost to them of doing business in the island. So that is an important factor. Do we charge all banks when some of them don't have local depositors? So the impact on the banks has to be considered. And then the question of states funding, which is what I believe Deputy Joseph was discussing, the £100 million potential for funding from the states will still be there. It's in this year's budget. It is carved out from our budgets on an annual basis. It is there. The 100 million is there. that means there is £100 million that we effectively cannot spend for any other purpose because we need it to support the scheme. So it is not an easy matter. Just increasing the limit isn't an easy matter. I'm not going to speculate on how many local people have deposits of more than £50,000. It may be a relatively small number. That's not an excuse not to change it. It is also £50,000 per depositor per bank. So if you have £200,000, you can. I think it's opening bank accounts is difficult everywhere. We're not alone, but you could have a savings account in more than one bank if you want to diversify, and joint accounts also. Both depositors, I believe, have the benefit of the 50,000 from memory. So it is a difficult and challenging piece of work, and what we're focusing on at the moment is is enhancing the operation of the scheme that we have, and working on a resolution model that provides more proactive and relevant protections for larger banking institutions and by extension by islanders, by ensuring as far as we can that those banks don't collapse, that they stay there, that people know they can get their money out. So the resolution framework itself and all this work in contingency planning is really valuable, and this is possibly more comfort and more protection to individual depositors than the scheme is, because it tries to stop the scheme ever coming into operation. The last thing anybody wants is the deposit compensation scheme actually being triggered. And the resolution framework is designed to use various tools so that there are other sources of funds to draw on that are not deposit funds, and that those funds are not put at risk. In terms of our limit, it is lower than jurisdictions such as the UK, the US and the EU, but it is in line with the other Crown dependencies, and it's typically higher, I just have a list and unfortunately I can't find it, than many other small island states. We do have better protection than other small islands, particularly those in the Caribbean. And it's not really clear in terms of cost benefit, because we do have to think about the benefits that would derive from doing this, as I say, huge piece of work to reconsider the limits and eligibility and how they're funded. It's not clear how much value would be gained by increasing the limit and how much it would cost us. So the increase in the increase in the compensation limit would also have to be weighed against the authority's ability to raise money. It has it will have the £100 million from government. I think that is not likely to pay out every depositor in a bank in Jersey, any of the bigger banks. The removal of the limit enables the resolution authority to borrow or to make a claim in the liquidation of the bank. And again, what we don't want to do is increase the burden on the industry by addressing a risk that is possibly smaller. I think we would argue that the risk of bank failure now, because of the resolution framework, because of the greater regulatory oversight, is smaller now than it was in 2009. So it's not a simple matter. The Resolution Authority, as they've responded to scrutiny, have also pointed out that changes to the parameters do require careful review, modelling and consultation. And while, as someone mentioned, we can't tie the hands of a future government, but I think it would be impossible for a future government to ignore this piece of work. Once all this work is done, we will be ready to then think about this piece of work and think about whether it is necessary and what value it gives to the island, what value it gives to the depositors. But the resolution framework is possibly more comfort than the compensation scheme. And the last point, which I had in my head and it vanished, but it's come back in, I would also just like to emphasise that the compensation limit is a preliminary payment that can be made through the deposit compensation scheme. If you have £100,000 in a bank account and that bank fails, under the scheme, the scheme will pay you out your £50,000, you haven't lost the other 50,000. You maintain your rights against the bank, and you can still make a claim against that bank for recovery of the funds or the debt that is owed to you. If you were going to be strictly correct, you haven't lost your right as a creditor of the bank to claim in the liquidation. And I do have something at the very back of my mind that someone told me: in bank failures, most small depositors do get almost all their money back. But I cannot find any evidence for that statement, but I was told it a very long time ago. So that is a quite long answer, but I think it has addressed the questions, hopefully. Thank you. I move the principal
And
sorry. Call for the appeal. Call
let's
for the appeal,
for
please,
members
sir.
to return to their seats. Votes on the principles for P42, Draft Bank Recovery and Resolution Jersey Amendment Law. And I ask the greffier to open the voting and members to vote. Members have had the opportunity of casting their vote. Then I ask the greffier to close the voting. The principles have been adopted. 45 votes for, no votes contra, no abstentions. Does the True Scrutiny Panel wish to call the matter in, Deputy?
Yes.
Yes. Very well. In which case, I think a date has to be fixed for when it comes
So
back.
we were thinking not the next sitting, but the 30th of September should be sufficient time for us to do the scrutiny that we still feel we need to do on this.
So then it's deferred to the 30th of September for the scrutiny report. Very well. We now move on to the next item of business, which is the Draft Criminal Justice Young Offenders Jersey Amendment Law, lodged by the Minister for Justice and Home Affairs. The main respondent will be the Chair of the Children, Education and Home Affairs Scrutiny Panel, and I ask the greffier to read that citation.
Draft Criminal Justice Young Offenders Jersey Amendment Law 2000, a law to amend the schedule to the Criminal Justice Young Offenders Jersey Law 2014, the States, subject to the sanction of His Most Excellent Majesty and Council, adopted the following law.
Minister.
Thank you, sir. I'm pleased to bring this short but important amendment before the Assembly today. If passed, the draft Criminal Justice Youth Offenders Jersey Amendment Law will amend the schedule within the Criminal Justice Young Offenders Jersey Law 2014. That schedule contains the provisions concerning the constitution and procedures of the Youth Court. The effect of the amendment is to increase the age of retirement of Youth Court panel members from 60 to 70 years and to gender neutralise the term chairman. And if passed, these amendments will come in 7 days after it is registered. Sir, I said this amendment was short, and it really is. It is to effect changing a number from 60 to 70 and changing a word from chairman to chair. I also said that whilst short, the change is important. By way of explanation, the Youth Court has a primary function to hear charges against children and young people up to the age of 18 years. When it sits, the Youth Court is normally constituted of 3 members, the magistrate and 2 panel members, one of which must be a woman. Panel members are appointed by the superior number of the Royal Court. They are members of the community and are unpaid. Members of the judiciary have informed me that currently there is a material risk of the court not being able to deal with its statutory duty due to having an insufficient pool of individuals to populate the Youth Court panel and form a Youth Court. I understand the Youth Court has previously had to cancel Youth Courts due to a lack of panel members. Whilst the court has made efforts to recruit new panel members, there is an issue in that panel members must retire at the age of 60. This age of 60, in my opinion, sir, stops some members of our community applying to be members due to their work and life commitments. For existing members with some years of experience, they are forced to retire when they would in many other areas, including doing other roles in the court, be able to continue. Instead, what happens is the court loses the input and experience of these members who are serving an important role for the island. Sir, if I may, I would like to pause at this point to thank those members of the community who are currently serving as panel members and those that have previously volunteered their time. It is their voluntary commitment to the court and the island that keeps the youth court running alongside the dedicated members of the judicial system. Sir, as I said, when comparing the age of youth panel members even to the age of other court members, for example, the retirement of jurats is 72, and for the chair of the youth court magistrate, it is 70. To remedy this position, the amendments seek to change the retirement age from 60 years to 70 years. The other small amendment is to gender neutralise the term chairman and the substituting it with the term chair. Again, this is minor, but another small chip at challenging language, and in particular, the language of our legislation, to be more equitable in its form, where there is no presumption of gender for a specific role, especially as in this case, the chair of the youth court is often a woman. Sir, in conclusion, these are small amendments brought before the Assembly today. If passed, they modify language and will significantly assist the youth court to fulfil its duty, attract greater diversity of candidates, bring some parity to other court staff, and retain and attract members of the community to undertake this vital work. I therefore ask the Assembly to give this their support in bringing these amendments into force. Thank you, sir.
Are the principles seconded?
Yes, sir.
Does any member wish to speak on the principles? Deputy Catherine Curtis.
Thank you, sir. Just a short comment, and I speak as chair of the CEHA panel. The current age limit of 60 years old for those volunteering to sit on the youth court panel prevents suitable people from taking up or continuing in this role. I'm sure there are very capable and knowledgeable people over the age of 60 who we should be welcoming onto the youth court panel. And the panel supports these changes.
Does any other member wish to speak on the principles? Deputy Andrews.
Thank you, sir. I just want clarity from the Minister as to why there is a need for retirement age. I think there is potentially an opportunity where we could be allowing members of the community who want to maybe give something back who are over the age of 70, and I feel that this proposal is potentially depriving them of this opportunity. Thank you, sir.
Does any other member wish to speak on the principles? Deputy Doublé.
Thank you, sir. Just briefly, I wanted to focus on the change from chairman to chair, which is something that we did for our own standing orders a few years ago. And it was my understanding that this had been done in other pieces of legislation. I'm not sure if this is a question for the Minister. It might actually be for the Solicitor General. But in the same way as other pieces of legislation, for example, with oaths and affirmations, there was an amendment that said anywhere that an oath is mentioned in a law, it can also mean an affirmation, and this is what it means. Could we not just have one amendment that would cover any legislation that has the word chairman in it, to do exactly what the Minister's doing today for this one? It may be for the Solicitor General. I'll leave that to your discretion, sir.
Mr. Solicitor.
Well, if the legislature wants to legislate in that way, it's perfectly within its rights to do so.
Deputy Stephen.
Thank you, sir. And just very quickly, also on the point of language, this proposition reminded me of the late Senator Sarah Ferguson, who I heard on more than one occasion say, "I am not a piece of furniture." But that said, I do agree absolutely with the move to neutralise the language, the gender neutralising the language there, and would just support what actually Deputy Doublé has said, and the more we can do this and the easier we could make it across the board, the better. Thank you, sir.
Deputy Morell.
Thank you, sir. It was really to pick up from where Deputy Andrews left off. And I welcome the Minister's proposal here before us today to take from 60 to 70 years old the age of retirement. It should not be detracting from the Minister's proposition, that I think Deputy Andrews' point is well made, that actually perhaps we should be seeking to remove retirement ages altogether. I don't think the Minister herself needs to respond to that in this proposition, because I think it's understandable that this proposition has just changed the number. But I think it is a question, and maybe we should be more focused on maximum term limits than retirement ages. You know, so I think in most institutions in the island, courts included, you know, perhaps saying a 10-year term is the maximum or 2 5-year terms is the maximum is a good way of making sure that we have a continuous kind of rotation of new minds, new ideas, new thinking, new ways of approaching these institutions. But to say, especially as we have a population that is getting older, this is something, you know, Deputy Ferguson, Senator Ferguson would often also talk about. And, you know, just because people are older does not mean they cannot serve in these sorts of roles. So I do wonder if it's something that we should, as an Assembly, think about in getting rid of these maximum retirement ages and replacing them with just maximum lengths of term. Thank you, sir.
Deputy Scott.
Thank you, sir. I agree with Deputy Andrews and Deputy Morell. And in fact, in some jurisdictions like the US, I believe it would actually be against the discrimination laws even to have that sort of limit. So total sympathy there. With reference, but again, that won't stop me from supporting this proposition, nor will the fact that it is changing the term chairman to chair. I too thought of the late Senator Ferguson and her references to pieces of furniture, but I also do wonder sometimes whether what's actually happening is a form of intolerance in terms of there is still a difference between I don't always see a difficulty with women being likened in terms of qualities of men in some ways. I'm thinking of that Scissor Sister song, She's My Man, and how so different it is if you actually use the expression I'm your man to I'm your woman. It's just, I just find this, excessive wokeism, but I'll leave it there. Thanks.
Does any other member wish to speak on the principles? If no other member wishes to speak on the principles, then I close the debate and call upon the Minister to respond.
Thank you, sir, and I'm glad I said it was simple. I fully accept what all of the... first of all, thank you to the chair of the scrutiny panel for their support, and I do wholeheartedly agree with the principles that have been raised by Deputy Andrews, Deputy Morell and obviously Deputy Scott from the point of view of ages. And I'll pass that back to policy officers, to whoever deals with this, probably going to be mine, no doubt. But I will feed that back and we'll see what we can look at in relation to that matter. In relation to the terminology of chair, and of course, I think it's very important to, as much as we can, make everything gender neutral. And I know that's why some of the terminology in relation to scrutiny panels and the word was used as maybe the president as opposed to chair. And that may be something that we need to consider in the future. But I don't feel it's probably necessarily one for this piece of legislation. But I thank people for their support, sir. Thank you.
Do you maintain the principles and...
yes, sir, I maintain the principles. Thank you, sir.
Yes. Those in favour of adopting the principles kindly show.
Have the appel, please, sir.
The appel is called for. Invite members to return to their seats.
Sir, should we not be asked if we're calling it in? Or?
Have we got pardon?
We haven't got there yet.
The appel was called for, yes.
Jesus, ahead of me.
I ask the referee to open the voting and members to vote. The vote is on the principle of the draft Criminal Justice Young Offenders Law. If members are members to vote, if members have had the opportunity of casting their vote, just wait a second there there we are. If members have had the opportunity of casting their vote, ask the referee to close the voting. The principles have been adopted. 40 votes pour, no votes contra, no abstentions. Assume that the scrutiny panel is not wishing to call this in?
Yes, sir, we're not going to anyway.
You aren't going to? No, not going to, righto. How do you wish to deal with the matter in second reading, Minister?
Sir, I would like to take the amendments to the Assembly en bloc, please.
Yes.
This is a very short amendment, as I said, containing 3 articles. If passed, they will amend the schedule within the Criminal Justice Young Offenders Jersey Law 2014. Article 1 is an article that simply states that the amends the Criminal Justice Young Offenders Jersey Law 2014. Article 2 contains the actual amendments to the schedule, the effect of which, if passed, is to increase the age of retirement of members to the Youth Court panel from 60 to 70 years and to make the provisions of that schedule gender neutral. And Article 3 states that, if passed, this law comes into force 7 days after it is registered by the Royal Court. Thank you, sir.
Thank you very much. Is it seconded for second reading? Does any member wish to speak in second reading? Those in favour of adopting in second reading, declare as called for. Invite members to return to their seats. The vote is on the amendment law in second reading. I ask the referee to open the voting and members to vote. Members have had the opportunity of casting their vote. And I ask the referee to close the voting. The law is adopted in second reading. 40 votes for, no votes contra, no abstention. Do you propose in third reading, Minister?
Yes, please, sir.
Is it seconded for third reading? Yes, sir. Does any member wish to speak in third reading? Those in favour of adopting in third reading, kindly show.
Help me, sir.
L is called for. I invite members to return to the seats they have so recently run away from. And I ask the greffier to open the voting and members to vote. If members have had the opportunity of casting their vote, then I ask the greffier to close the voting. The law is adopted in third reading. 41 votes for, no votes contra, no abstentions. The next item is the draft Civil Status Abolition of Legitimacy, etc. Jersey Amendment Law lodged by the Minister for Justice and Home Affairs. The main responder is the Chair of the Children, Education and Home Affairs Scrutiny Panel, and I ask the greffier to read the citation.
Draft Civil Status, Abolition of Legitimacy, etc. Jersey Law 2000, a law to abolish the status of illegitimacy and for related purposes. The States, subject to the sanction of His Most Excellent Majesty and Council, have adopted the following law.
Minister.
Thank you, sir. Sir, I'm pleased to propose the draft legitimacy law, which forms a key part of the work to bring the Children and Civil Status Jersey Law 2024 into force. As previously approved by this Assembly, this legislation advances the parental rights of same-sex couples and the rights of parents through fertility treatment or surrogacy. However, the continued existence of legitimacy status is at odds with the spirit and purpose of that law. It is discriminatory, outdated, and incompatible with modern families. This legislation is necessary to prevent the children of same-sex parents being labelled as illegitimate. I'm happy to support the Minister for Children and Families to bring this proposition before you so that the historic status of legitimacy will be abolished. It represents Jersey's continued commitment to the UN Convention on the Rights of the Child for the island's children. As it stands, only children born to opposite-sex married couples are considered legitimate under Jersey law. In 2024, 53% of children were born into families with married parents. Nearly half of all children were, by legal definition, labelled as illegitimate. This is not right, it's unjust, and it's deeply hurtful. Many people are surprised that the concept of legitimacy still exists in Jersey. The status has little relevance for material rights anymore. Legal changes have gradually equalised the rights of those who are classed as illegitimate. In 2010, the State Assembly amended the Wills and Successions Law to ensure equal inheritance rights, removing one of the last material distinctions. Today, legitimacy is a historic and hallowed term, one that serves limited purpose. Extensive research has been conducted as part of a review of the concept to understand the areas of the law where legitimacy status still has an impact. This has enabled us to bring the abolition of legitimacy forward at pace. To prevent unintended consequences or retrospective claims, a number of savings provisions have been added to this law. This means that the concept of legitimacy will still apply in a very limited number of circumstances. These include the succession of a person who died before the law comes into force. Changes will also not be retrospectively applicable to trusts established before the law's commencement. The abolition will not apply to so these words are just not ideal. Yeah. Hereditary titles or manor rights. This is due to the complexity of customary law and to prevent uncertainty. To remove legitimacy to these areas would require a lot of extra historical research and would have been extremely complex. Legitimacy legislation is now rarely used. Supporting legislation will be repealed from the statute book, including the 1963 and 1973 legitimacy laws and the 1974 rules and regulations. This means that provisions are kept up to date and unused processes do not sit idly within legislation. Over 20 pieces of legislation will be amended to remove discriminatory terminology. This draft legitimacy law would come into force on the same day as the Children and Civil Status Law as part of the wider package of legislation. I've worked closely with the Minister for Children and Families to amend the commencement provisions, so this package of legislation will now be brought into force via order rather than appointed day act. This will allow the Minister to bring everything into force as soon as operationally possible in the autumn. Stakeholders have spoken about the urgent need for this legislation. On this occasion, an appointed day act may have caused a delay. I know the Minister is fully committed to commencing the legislation as quickly as possible to improve the fundamental rights of families. The removal of legitimacy is well overdue. Policymakers in the UK have been discussing the issue since the 1980s. Scotland abolished legitimacy in 2006. This is a symbolic and moral commitment to treating all children with equal dignity, regardless of their parents' relationship or marital status. I urge members to support this proposition. Symbolically, this will be a big step forward for children's rights. Sir, I propose the principles.
Are the principles seconded? Does any member wish to speak on the principles? Jarvis and Peter.
Thank you, sir. I would like to begin by thanking the Minister for Justice and Home Affairs for her support and for bringing forward the draft legitimacy law. Over the past few months, we have worked closely together to ensure this legislation is ready to support the wider reforms of the Children and Civil Status Law, which significantly improve family rights. We are united in our belief that the status of legitimacy is outdated, discriminatory, and must be removed from our statute book. In April 2024, the government committed to reviewing Jersey's position on legitimacy by 2026. Policy work and research was conducted during the second half of 2024. The conclusion was clear: there are no compelling legal or technical reasons to retain the concept of legitimacy.
Over the last few decades, the rights of those who are labelled as illegitimate have been equalised, particularly in the area of inheritance. Today, legitimacy is largely symbolic, but that symbolism is hurtful to many. Currently, around half the children born in Jersey are registered as illegitimate at birth, solely because their parents are not in a mixed-sex marriage. It perpetuates a historic social stigma that has no place in modern inclusive society. As we have heard, Scotland abolished legitimacy in 2006 with little fanfare. As Minister for Children and Families, I find it concerning that we continue to label children based on their parents' marital status. Every child should be registered simply as the child of their parent or parents, nothing more, nothing less. All children are equal. All children are valued. Abolishing legitimacy is a powerful symbolic step in Jersey's commitment to the UN Convention on the Rights of the Child. The Children and Civil Status Law has been a driver in bringing this work forward. From the outset, it was recognised that the concept of legitimacy would need to be addressed. Without this reform, the default position is that children of same-sex parents would be registered as illegitimate. That is clearly unacceptable. The alternative, attempting to harmonise legitimacy with primary legislation, would have led to an uneasy debate about which children should or should not be labelled in this way. The only equitable solution is to abolish legitimacy entirely. I would also like to thank the Minister for Justice and Home Affairs for agreeing to a small but important amendment to the commencement provisions for the Children and Civil Status Law. This change will allow me as Minister to bring the full legislative package into force via order, providing greater certainty around the implementation timeline. We've been working extremely hard towards an autumn commencement date, to which I'm committed. And we are when we will be operationally ready to support families from day one. As I've said, I am fully committed to delivering this package of reforms as soon as possible. We know that parents have been waiting a long time to be properly recognised on their children's birth certificate. This is a fundamental right. To conclude, I would like to thank the staff for working on the legitimacy legislation and for bringing it forward so quickly. I fully support and champion this work because it benefits all children and families in Jersey. Legitimacy is an outdated and unjust concept. Its abolition is long overdue. Thank you, sir.
Thank you very much, Contabs. Any other member wish to speak on the principles? I beg your pardon. Deputy Howe.
Thank you, sir. I just rise to say thank you very much indeed to the Minister for Justice and Home Affairs. This will make a real difference in our island to many, many children, and it's great that no one will be illegitimate going forward. Thank you, sir.
Contabs St Mary.
Thank you, sir. Very briefly, in the absence of Deputy Balash, who is Chair of LAP, Legislation Advisory Panel, I'm reminded by my colleague Deputy Ward that the officers did very kindly brief LAP on the proposals involved here. We're very pleased to receive that briefing, and as a panel, very happy to endorse the proposal. On a not unrelated matter, as I think I mentioned at that briefing, the status of one's parents, married or otherwise, can be relevant to other things. I'm thinking here particularly in relation to domicile, where certainly under the general law, the position was that a child born to parents who were married took the domicile of her father, his or her father, and if unmarried, took the domicile of his or her mother. It does occur to me that certain legislation may not have caught up with the form of legislation we are now approving, and that is something which perhaps ought to be reviewed. And I will pursue that elsewhere. Thank you, sir.
Thank you very much. Deputy Doublé.
Thank you, sir. And the first thing that I want to say about this legislation is just to reflect actually on the term, and the Minister touched on this in her speech, that term illegitimate how actually completely abhorrent it is. And the Minister mentioned that people are surprised when they hear that it's still in our legislation. And I remember my own feeling of surprise. It was probably about 7 years ago when I learnt that this term was still in our legislation, and raised it with the Minister at the time, who was supportive of changing it, and we were told that it would be too difficult to do, and certainly too difficult to do quickly, and would delay other work. So it was put on the back burner, but it seems it was achievable. And I think the officers who have managed to do the work in the background on this actually should be commended, because it seems they have managed to achieve it in shorter order than perhaps I was led to believe in the past. And indeed, reflecting on how abhorrent that term is to a child, and it is completely contrary to the UNCRC. And it's one area where our legislation hasn't kept up with our culture, and there are other similar areas, and which especially pertain to unmarried couples, because there's also a perception that common law marriage exists, and that people have rights there. And I think we do need to look at perhaps some of the cultural perceptions that people have around legislation, and find areas where some changes might need to be made. And it was interesting to hear the previous speaker actually about the Legislation Advisory Panel. I think that might be something that they could look at. Having been a member of that panel in the past, I know what good work they do. So language is really important, and whilst this might not have a material effect, it's more of a cultural effect. Moving on to the order-making power, which is being introduced, if we approve it, within this legislation to bring into force the Children and Civil Status Law, which of course grants same-sex parental rights on an equal basis to all other parents. And the Minister and I have had some discussions about this, and indeed a meeting with some of the families and stakeholders involved. And whereas the families did not want this law, the illegitimacy law, to delay, I think the fact is it's here with us today, and I am going to vote for this. And I'm going to celebrate it because separating the two issues, this is a really important change that needs to be made. But I would like to urge the Minister for Children to make sure that if we approve today this order-making power, that he does use it at the soonest possible opportunity. I don't know if members have noted that an order-making power is included within this legislation. Certainly my colleague Deputy Balash has raised objections in the past to order-making powers being inserted in legislation. I know other members have concern about this, and I have had concerns about that myself. I am going to support it today because I feel it is the best chance that we have for actually getting the same-sex parental rights into force as soon as possible, and I'm putting my faith in the Minister here to do that as soon as possible. So I will be supporting that, and I urge the ministers involved to keep the families and the LGBTQ+ community updated as to when that order-making power would be used.
Much, Deputies. Any other member wish to speak on the principles? Deputy Catherine Curtis.
Thank you, sir. As a member of the Legislation Advisory Panel and the chair of the Children, Education and Home Affairs Scrutiny Panel, I can say that on the CEHA panel we have looked at domicile too and received briefings. But sir, I speak as the scrutiny chair of the CEHA panel. And in our review of the Children and Civil Status Law last year, one of our recommendations was for the government to review the relevance of retaining laws relating to legitimacy, while considering the compatibility with the UNCRC and ECHR regulations. And I thank the Minister and her team for bringing this legislation to abolish the status of illegitimacy. No child should be described as illegitimate. The Oxford Dictionary describes the word illegitimate as meaning born to parents who are not married to each other, but also as synonymous with unauthorised and can be used to infer something as invalid. That's no way to categorise any child. There will be plenty of people among our older generations who will remember this term being used as an insult and used to discriminate against innocent children. So at last we can put this matter right. No longer will any children be called illegitimate. So this is some legislation to celebrate, and the panel is fully supportive, and I congratulate the Minister on bringing this forward.
Does any other member wish to speak on the principles? No other member wishes to speak on the Deputy Taddy.
So I'm mindful, whilst this is a very serious subject, we must also remind ourselves that there was a very famous illegitimate gentleman from the region, I don't know if he was a gentleman really, but about 1,000 years ago from the region, who was William the Conqueror, and he was the second Duke of Normandy, and of course he was illegitimate himself, and it's somebody who he didn't let his illegitimacy hold him back. Much to the contrary, it really spurred him on to his success and his fame when he became, of course, he's one of ours. He was the Duke of Normandy when we were still very much part of Normandy before Normandy conquered England and before he became the king. And there is a more serious point here, is that he was known by his contemporaries as William the Bastard, because the two went hand in hand. And I think there is a key link there, is that it's not just the fact that there is a legal differentiation in the status of that, but there's also very much that this term, which was used back at that time and is still used today, has taken on a semantic change where it's just used basically as an insult, as we know. Indeed, you don't need to be illegitimate nowadays to be labelled with that label necessarily. So the other point I wanted to make is that although this is a really great step that the Assembly is taking forward, language does matter, is that looking at it from the outside, I think the Assembly can and maybe will be accused of sending out some very strange and mixed messages to young people in the island, in the sense that we're happy to deal with labels and perhaps the aesthetics of it, but only earlier today we've sent a clear message to children in the island, irrespective of the status of their parents, married, unmarried, same-sex marriages or not, that whilst they won't have the security of tenure and that they may have to live in homes which are unaffordable, in which the rents may go up excessively, on the one hand, at least we're taking the label of legitimacy and illegitimacy away. So, you know, on balance, it's giving with one hand, taking with the other. So I'll let members reflect on that.
Thank you. Does any other member wish to speak? If no other member wishes to speak, I call upon the Minister to reply.
Thank you, sir, and I thank those members who have spoken, and I will reassure any of those that have concerns about maybe things not coming as quick as they would like. Trust me, I'll be very close on the tails of anybody who's bringing this law forward this year to make sure that it does happen. I would like to thank and take the opportunity to thank the Minister for Children and Families, and also all of the officers that, as already been stated, have worked on this fairly quickly in order to get these terms removed from the law, which is totally appropriate. And I thank members for their contribution, sir, and I'd like to call for the appel. Thank you.
Thank you very much. The appel has been called for. I invite members to return to their seats. And I ask the greffier to open the voting. If all members have now cast their votes, I ask the greffier to close the voting. And I can announce that the principles have been adopted. 45 votes for, no votes contra, no abstentions. Deputy Catherine Curtis, does your panel wish to have this legislation referred to it? Thank you very much. Thank you. How do you wish to propose the articles, Minister?
Sir, I would be happy to take the articles en bloc, please.
You don't wish to speak to them?
No, sir.
Okay. Are the articles seconded?
Yes, sir.
Does any member wish to speak on the articles? Those members in favour, kindly show. The appel has been called for. I invite members, if there are any out there, to return to their seats, and I ask the greffier to open the voting.
Sir, I'm unable.
Mine's not working, sir.
I think this is.
So I think we may have something with the system, so if we could stop that vote. So we'll just take a moment for the voting system to be reset. Are we ready, greffier, to... Yeah. Okay, so I'll ask greffier to open the voting and for members to cast their votes, please. Yeah, seems to be working now. All members have cast their votes. I ask the greffier to close the voting. I'll just wait for the online. And I can announce that the articles have been adopted. 44 votes for, no votes contra, no abstentions. Do you wish to propose the matter in third reading, Mr. Minister?
Yes, please, sir.
Is the matter seconded in third reading? Sir. Does any member wish to speak in third reading? Those members in favour, kindly. The appel has been called for. I think all members are already here. And I ask the greffier to open the voting, please. If all members have cast their vote, I ask the greffier please to close the voting. I can announce that the law has been adopted in third reading. 43 votes for, no votes contra, no abstentions. The next item is Jersey Police Complaints Authority appointment of members lodged by the Minister for Justice and Home Affairs, and the main respondent is the Chair of the Children, Education and Home Affairs Scrutiny Panel. And I ask the greffier please to read the proposition.
The states are asked to decide whether they are of opinion, in accordance with Article 2 and of Schedule to the Police Complaints and Discipline Jersey Law 1999, to appoint the following individuals as members of the Police Complaints Authority, each for a period of 3 years commencing immediately. Mrs. Andrea Rowbottom, Mr. Ian Johnson, Ms. Val Cartwright and Mr. Tim Rogers.
Minister.
Thank you, sir. I'm very pleased to recommend to the Assembly the appointments of Mrs. Andrea Rowbottom, Mr. Ian Johnson, Miss Val Cartwright and Mr. Tim Rogers as members of the Jersey Police Complaint Authority for a period of 3 years. As members will be aware, the Jersey Police Complaints Authority supervises the investigation of complaints against the States of Jersey Police. In 2024, the authority supervised the investigation of 22 complaints. The authority is constituted under the Police Complaints and Discipline Jersey Law 1999 and, in accordance with the law, must consist of a chair as well as at least 6 and no greater than 8 members. The draft Police Complaints and Conduct Jersey Law was adopted by the States Assembly on March the 30th, 2022. This law brought into force subject to Assembly approval of new regulations, which will be lodged later this year. The new law will provide for a minimum of 3 members and a maximum of 12 members. There are currently 6 members of the authority, including the chair, with 1 member's term ending at the end of this year. Further appointments to the authority are therefore required in order for the authority to perform its statutory functions under the new law and regulations. The chair and all the members are volunteers who give up their time to serve on the authority for no remuneration. Details in relation to the professional background of all nominees is included in the report, and members will see that the nominees bring skills and experience from a range of professional backgrounds, which will no doubt further strengthen the authority. I would like to take the opportunity to express my thanks to these nominees for offering their time and expertise in service of their community. I'm pleased to recommend the appointments to the Assembly. I make the proposition.
Thank you. Is the proposition seconded? Does any member wish to speak on the proposition? No member wishes to speak. Do you wish the appel, Minister?
Yes, please, sir.
Sorry, there is a member who wishes to speak. Deputy Moore.
Thank you, sir. And I just rise to briefly state that whilst I have absolutely no qualms with the people who are proposed, indeed I thank them for their service, I would like the Minister to address how she proposes to move forward in terms of improving the structure of the Police Complaints Authority to ensure a greater level of public contentment with its operation and the support that it receives, in terms of, if I may just provide an example, in terms of a greater level of independence to the work of the Police Complaints Authority and the support that is provided to the volunteers who sit on the board. Thank you, sir.
Thank you. Does any other member wish to speak? Then I call on the Minister to reply.
Thank you, sir, and I thank the Deputy for her points made. As I've said, the legislation is almost with us, the new legislation. I say that almost, sir, because it has been bouncing around for a significant period of time. The new legislation will be lodged this autumn, hopefully, and I know that there will be changes in relation to that law that may bring further comfort to what the Deputy is required, and making changes in relation to it being a commission. I do understand that there are persons who feel that the authority may not be as independent as they like, because obviously it is the police force that actually do the investigations. However, the members of the Police Complaints Authority are not trained investigators, and that can be a difficulty, because it is very difficult to find people with those types of skills in order that you would be able to have a totally independent body. So I would hope that when the law comes in, that the Deputy will feel more comfort in relation to when it's moved to being a commission.
Thank you. And sorry, Minister, did you say you did want the appel before when I asked you?
Yes, please, sir.
Yep, the appel has been called for. I invite members to return to their seats. And I ask the greffier to open the voting. All members have had a chance to vote. I ask the greffier to close the voting. And I can announce that the proposition has been adopted. There were 42 votes for, no votes contra, and no abstentions. The next item is meanwhile use of the former gas place site lodged by Deputy War, for which the main respondent is the Minister for Treasury and Resources. There is an amendment that has been lodged by Deputy Alex Curtis. Deputy War, are you minded to accept the amendment?
I'd like to have a debate on the amendment, sir.
Very well, we shall proceed in that way, and I will therefore ask the greffier to read the proposition as it stands.
So before we start, I'd just like to say that I will be withdrawing from this debate. If the proposition was about the general principle of meanwhile use, I would love to be involved, but because it's about a specific site, I think it's appropriate that I withdraw. Thank you, sir.
Thank you. Greffier, thank you.
The states are asked to decide whether they are of opinion that upon its vacation by the current users and until such time as long-term development commences, meanwhile use shall be made of the former Gas Place site, including the former Gas Place showroom site, with the development of that use to be informed by engagement with relevant local stakeholders, and to request the Minister for Treasury and Resources, in her capacity as shareholder representative, to request Angium Homes to work with such stakeholders to develop and implement meanwhile use of the site that will be beneficial to the community.
Deputy Ward.
Thank you, sir. And I'd like to start by saying, following all the challenges of this morning's debate, I'd like to think this is an opportunity for the Assembly to come together as one. So I brought this proposition to the Assembly because I am, and I think we all are, very disturbed at how many public-owned sites remain empty and unused for years without any temporary productive use being made of them. The community continually questions how this happens. How many more times do the words La Folie have to be mentioned before we demonstrate that we are capable of doing something different? Surely we, as a States Assembly, can work together on this and deliver their wishes in a unified way. Today, we have an opportunity to put out a unifying message. To reiterate the Chief Minister's comments today, this supports people, families, and children. The message is, it says, we can work together for the community, that we care about all parts of our community, young and old, and provide something accessible and low cost for those at the sharp end of the cost of living crisis. I share the following with Assembly members. It's a written question I posed back in April 2024 to the Infrastructure Minister. Following the demolition of a number of premises in Kensington Place and the subsequent boarding up of the site, will the Minister consider converting this site into a temporary car park to increase footfall and to assist businesses in this part of St Helier? And if not, why not? To which the answer was, this site is identified for use as part of the new healthcare facilities programme, and there are no current plans to convert this site into a temporary car park facility. Any temporary use of the site outside of the immediate control of health and community services and the programme team represents a potential risk of delay to programme delivery. Delay to programme delivery. Here we are, nearly 2 years on, and that site remains empty, when instead it could be helping draw people into the area, giving those local businesses much needed additional trade. A divided Assembly unable to deliver even something as basic as a car park that could right now be benefiting the community. This is what happens when we turn our back on meanwhile use. Why are we so fearful of meanwhile use when it can be so beneficial to our community? In my report, I focus on one particular need, specific to part of our community. It's a problem we need to be attempting to sort out now. My proposition does not say, I want the gas site to be a community hub for young people. My proposition says to develop and implement meanwhile use of the site that will be beneficial to the community. I remind the Assembly we have a responsibility to our community to do things now, not promise, but do. I'll quote business troubleshooter Kevin Keane, who in response to my post on LinkedIn about La Folie said, one thing successive governments seem to lack is an awareness of the time value of money, always seeking the perfect solution, but predictably never finding it. All the time, valuable assets sit there and rot, and any benefits that might come from the asset wait until we can't afford to do anything anyway. The government response to my proposition completely jumps the gun, yet again driving division, a wedge into this assembly, rather than thinking how we can work together to ensure that we really do sweat the assets at our disposal. Instead, the report goes into the minutiae of why it wouldn't be possible to put in what I'm suggesting. That's why Deputy Curtis's amendment is so helpful. It reflects that there should be no limit as to what a meanwhile use could be, only that it is of benefit to the community. The message keeps, sorry, my computer's doing something weird here. Okay, here you go, that's fine. The culture shift, the message keep the site productive. The culture shift required is to always ask the question, what will the meanwhile use be? That has to become our modus operandi. That is what we are all duty-bound to work towards. Solutions for our community, whether they be short or long-term. I'm sure there will be many in the Assembly with their speeches today about why my suggested use is not feasible. Again, I remind members, this is just one idea. My proposition specifically says that upon its vacation by the current users and until such time as long-term development commences, meanwhile use shall be made of the former gas place site. Do something, but please don't leave such a valuable site vacant just because it's easier to do so or you have a difference of political opinion. I'm reminded of Deputy Mezek's speech this morning. In fact, I think he spoke this yesterday, when he spoke about positive politics and not resorting to bogus arguments. This is about doing the right thing, not political point scoring. To our eternal shame, this is exactly what has happened at La Folie. No meanwhile use, because there were lots of grand schemes in the pipeline. Yet here we are today, 20 years after its closure, and all we've created is an eyesore and zero community benefit. A legacy of division in this assembly and our community. We need to heal that. Please don't let us be sidetracked by lots of superfluous arguments. This is simply a debate about whether we mothball the gas place site or we put it to some use as yet to be specified that benefits the community of this island. It is a tiny request. I ask the Assembly to reflect upon how many sites currently lie vacant, unused and unloved. St Saviour's Hospital, Philip Lefevre House, Huguenot House, Avimore, Le Bas Centre, St Helier House, Heathfield Children Home site, the Esplanade Car Park, the Revere site, and in the private sector, Les Sablons and the Apollo site. Do we want to add the gas place site to this long list? That's what I'm asking today. We need to draw a line in the sand and for once do something positive. Positive politics. This Assembly has the opportunity to send out a really positive message to our community. Let's grasp it with both hands. There's a famous broken windows commentary that is often used. You can tell a community is thriving or in decline by the number of broken windows in the area. When people see broken windows that aren't being repaired, they see a community in decline. Society breaking down. So more windows are broken because it's apparent that nobody cares. These sites are our broken windows. Is that the message we want to send out from this Assembly, that we tolerate further decline? Promises will be made by members in this Assembly today as to the long-term future of the gas place site that may or may not come to fruition. The one thing that is for sure is that by voting for this proposition, something will happen to the gas place site now. something that will demonstrate that we can work together as an assembly for the good of islanders now. I want us to put out a message of hope to our community, and I quote Constable Jean's speech, that we are demonstrating to young islanders that we are taking their issues seriously, that we are determined to stem the decline and to do something positive now. Let's put people before politics. I move the proposition.
Thank you. Is the proposition seconded? There is the amendment lodged by Deputy Alex Curtis, and I ask the Greffier please to read the amendment.
Page 2, redesignate the existing wording as paragraph A. Page 2, after the words local shareholders, insert the words with any development to consider community or short-term economic uses, including temporary tenancies, provided such use does not impede any long-term plans for future development. And after the words beneficial to the community, insert the words or be economically constructive in the interim. Page 2, after paragraph A, insert a new paragraph B. B, that in the event the site is acquired by the public of the island or by any publicly owned or state-owned entity, the expectations in paragraph A and B shall continue to apply under such ownership until development for long-term use commences.
Thank you. Deputy.
Thank you, sir, and I'm glad to have the opportunity to present this amendment to Deputy Waugh's proposition. I've lodged this, sir, as, quite frankly, having had a chance to read Deputy Waugh's proposition, whilst I support some of the principle, I concluded I would not have been able to support it unamended. Of course, one option available to me and other members would have been to vote against it. However, I see, and I hope all members see, enough merit in the principles behind it that we can support it as amended by this amendment. I'm sure we can all agree that the government, nor its state-owned entities, on the whole, have a great track record when it comes to making the best use of our public estate all the time and between key uses. Likewise, I hope members agree that making the most of our estate has multiple benefits. These are not just financial, although sites could be generating a rental return in the short term, but social, as spaces could welcome the public, feature installations or community uses, as is what Deputy Waugh's proposition highlights, but crucially, ensures that when we have a use on an asset, we retain focus on it. It helps slow its deterioration, and it helps build a valuable corporate muscle in the wider management of our public estate. We do not take our finger off the pulse. In reading the proposition, a couple of things popped out that I must address, in particular why it needs amending. Firstly, we have in some ways two things in front of us. Deputy Waugh's proposition, worded, and secondly, the contents of his report, and I must admit the report and Deputy Waugh's strong and public narrative on his preferred vision for the site. The truth is, sir, we would still have been voting on the proposition, not the report. And the proposition is already fairly permissive to Andiam and the Minister. It solely states that a community use shall be provided in the meanwhile upon vacation of the current occupier, who is, as we will touch on, an existing meanwhile use. It does not propose that this should be who should pay for something on the site, what it is, or that it is targeted to children. It purely says community. So, for example, one could read that a valid meanwhile use under the unamended proposition would be opening it for weekly, fortnightly, or even monthly shopping markets. That would be a community use for the site in the meanwhile. Deputy Waugh's published a vision of what he would like. Drawings show play spaces, skate parks, pump tracks, and other things. To be clear, this is not what I want. I think it is fantastic and exciting. Members of the public want to engage in the visions we have for our sites, but I don't think that is what we should be deciding on as an assembly. Most importantly, we are here to decide on principles. But to come back, members would be voting on the proposition wording, not one member's aspirations. And I think Deputy Waugh made that very clear in his opening speech. That is why I decided to amend this, to provide the clarity and the flexibility and pragmatism I believe the government and Andean would require whilst agreeing to a principle. So I was a little confused by the Council of Ministers comments paper on the main proposition in relation to this amendment. And I genuinely hope that this is a chance in the Assembly to air what the amendment does, and that perhaps by voting on it importantly separately, it provides the clarity and confidence ministers need to be assured that what we would be agreeing is workable and does not derail any plans. So let me briefly address what this amendment does to the original proposition. Firstly, it removes, in essence, the forced meanwhile use of the proposition as a community use. It expands the definition to include short-term tenancies or anything that is considered economically constructive. I believe this covers any conceivable meanwhile use. This could be car parking, this could be construction site storage, as is the current meanwhile use, but maybe for a different site. And we know that there is plans to develop maybe the facility on the Ann Street Brewery. We know there are many developments around the site. If there are other contractors and the current operator vacated, we would just be saying this is a great site, use it. And so, to be clear, I think it is acknowledged by the Council of Ministers that the site is already in that meanwhile use. And it is working well as a meanwhile use. So there are many meanwhile uses that wouldn't hold anything up. And we know there are uses that would require no planning permission, that would require no building control, and no investment by government or Andean. Secondly, I've added the Council of Ministers a legitimate get-out clause. The amendment proposes the wording, quite deliberately, provided such use does not impede any long-term plans for future development. If that was inserted, sir, by the Council of Ministers themselves, one may think it borders on a wrecking amendment that it provides such a get-out clause. I don't think so. I think this allows an appropriate steer from the Assembly whilst reflecting the realities that if it is not feasible between vacation of the site and a new occupier to use the site in the meanwhile, then we have allowed for that. We are not binding hands. So to take a scenario in that case, if, for example, between the vacation of the current site operator and development starting was only 6 weeks, I think that Assembly would be very happy that no meanwhile use could be found because such a productive use of the site was in existence. And so lastly, sir, the amendment seeks to recognise the practical reality of this site in the fact that its ownership will likely have to change to be owned by government to progress its school plans. Therefore, this cleans up what could have been a technical mismatch that we would be directing Andean to work on something when they would not be the owner. Sir, I have amended this as, like so many of the public, we care and get frustrated that we leave sites vacant for too long, and we must start to be diligent and committed to ensuring our sites are used, even in the meanwhile. I do not believe it is the Assembly's role to dive into the details of what would go on this site, nor constrain the site owner. I also understand the potential concern for the Council of Ministers about the original public perception that could have come from supporting the unamended proposition. We would not want the public to see, perhaps, and confuse what has been published as a vision by a private member and the reality which would go on the site. That is why, as the chance that Deputy Wall agrees, it is valuable to debate separately. Members can clearly articulate that they agree with the principles, and it would ensure the Assembly controls the narrative here to avoid any public disconnect in understanding. Lastly, it has been suggested to me that it would have been better to have removed gas plays from the site entirely and debate the principle of meanwhile use. And whilst I do believe we would benefit from a debate on that, the proposition title is meanwhile use of the gas place site. We are unable to fundamentally amend the proposition from a site-specific thing. However, given we know the site is capable of meanwhile use, given we know that there is a chance it will be vacated soon, it does seem like a perfect place to start. So we can revisit the wider public estate later, but let's start here and I make the amendment.
Thank you. Is the amendment seconded? Conor St Helens, you had indicated you want to speak. Is that in relation to the amendment?
Yes, please.
Yes, Conor St Helens.
Thank you. So I'm speaking early in the debate because, unfortunately, I am going to be away on states business tomorrow and Friday, and I suspect the debate will run into tomorrow, so I won't be to vote anyway, which will please some people, but not others. I'm surprised in a way that the mover of the proposition is said he's going to accept the amendment, because it does seem to me to hollow out the meaning of what he has proposed. Deputy Ward wants to see, as soon as possible, young people in our town given extra space to play. And at first sight, you'd think, well, what a good idea. What the amendment seeks to do is to remove the specificity of Deputy Ward's proposition. And that seems to me to render it rather meaningless. The only part of the amendment I actually agree with is the last part, where it indicates that if the ownership of the site should change from Andium to the government, then the provision of meanwhile use should not be affected. And I agree with that. But I think it's a pity that he has sought to try to make Deputy Ward's proposition acceptable by, as I say, hollowing out its direct relevance to young people in a specific part of our town. And without straying too much onto the main proposition, I just want to explain what that is. We heard this morning and yesterday several speakers in relation to the residential tenancy law talking about putting children first. And if that isn't just to be a slogan, then how is it not putting children first to allow them as soon as possible to occupy the sites that are becoming empty in our town? And this is, of course, is happening. When I visited the site in question with the Mayor of Trenton, Liberation Day before last, he was amazed at what the Jersey Gas showroom would offer young people once it was emptied of insulation boards and the other paraphernalia that is being used to create a northern quarter. And he said, what a fantastic idea, as did, I have to say, the young people who had come with us on that particular site visit. Now, to remove that opportunity, to remove that instruction to the ministers, seems to me to be wrong, because we could accept the amendment, we could accept Deputy Ward's proposition as amended, and then nothing might happen. It might be turned into a car park, for example. Quite a lot of the site is already being used as a car park. And when you consider how little space teenagers have to run around and skateboard and do other stuff that they like to do on small, dangerous-looking bicycles, then it seems to me absolutely wrong that we wouldn't be seizing this opportunity with both hands. I also wanted to mention, because it was La Folie, of course, is a spectre that hangs over this debate, but it was linked with St Helier House, and I just wanted to suggest that St Helier House is not in a way fair to the parish which operates St Helier House, which owns St Helier House, to speak of it in the same breath as La Folie, because it's since the Grenfell Tower tragedy in 2017, when St Helier House was discovered to have the same cladding as Grenfell, that it had to be emptied, and the parish has been trying very hard indeed, and I know that many of the St Helier deputies have been involved in this exercise to try and find an acceptable use. It has, of course, a meanwhile use. The emergency services run around in it and simulate all kinds of disasters. It's a useful space for that kind of emergency response work to happen. But as I say, sir, I don't want to stray onto that. I merely want to say that, particularly if I'm not here for the main part of the debate, as Constable of the Parish, I think I should be allowed to say that I really do think we should allow young people access to the Jersey Gas site when it becomes vacant. I will allow other people to demolish the comments by the Council of Ministers. As an Assistant Minister, it wouldn't be appropriate for me to do that, although I did dissent from them when they were agreed at the Council of Ministers. Thank you, sir.
Thank you. Does any other member wish to speak? Deputy Rob Ward.
Yes, sir. This is on the amendment alone, isn't it?
That's right, yes, we're debating the amendment.
So the question I have on the amendment is anything that's there that we can't do already with current law in terms of
land that's owned. But I must touch on the I'm going to be incredibly positive when I say this, even though deep down inside, sir, I feel huge frustration and negativity. But I'm not going to let that escape in the words that I use, because I think it's destructive. So years ago, I don't know when it was now, 5 years ago, we had an agreement to build a school in Gas Place, a much needed school that would have benefited hundreds, if not thousands of young children now with a purpose-built brand new school. It should have been built, it should have been open this year. And it was delayed and delayed and delayed. Regeneration steering groups have delayed and delayed and delayed. And I have to point out, sir, that the Constable of St Helier has lodged an amendment, a proposition to delay it again, at the same time whilst making a speech that talks about whether children in St Helier should have access to facilities. So I'm afraid that I find difficult to stomach, because that school is far more important than any other building, in my view, in the centre of St Helier. Not only because it replaces two schools, and again, if any member of this assembly wants to see, please come with me to Springfield and St Luke's and see the miracles they are working in those schools to provide the best possible education they can in inadequate facilities. And then tell me that you do not want the school in central St Helier. And in addition to that, sir, and it is relevant because I have to make the point about use and what we're doing here, is La Passerelle Primary School, which should have been built by now, a purpose-built facility for some of the most needy children on our island who are currently being taught in porter cabins. And again, the staff are working miracles in those porter cabins to try and provide the type of education that those young people need. And what we've had is delay after delay after delay. But now, and so I have to say that previous housing ministers who over 2 years had the opportunity to talk to Andy about that land and to bring it and get it working for the school. That didn't happen. That did not happen. But now, sir, with the amendments, we've got this idea that we can develop anything on that land. It's a lovely idea. It's a lovely idea. We can just develop anything on that land at any time, free it up. It's very difficult to talk about the amendment alone without talking about Gas Place itself, because Gas Place is named. And so to separate the two, I think this is a very, I have to say, and I've got a lot of respect for the deputy who brought the amendment. I think he prepares well, he speaks well, and he's a very cognizant member of the Assembly who does his homework. And I don't mean it, you know, like homework. I mean, does his preparation, sorry, it just slips out. So it does work. But I say with any, it says, with any development to consider community or short-term economic use. Yes, that's great, but it can be absolutely anything. So we're amending this to say the Gas Place plans could be absolutely any plans and we can accept them. But we don't have to have any sort of information of how this is going to happen. We don't have to have any of the detail of what that will mean, the implications for these plans. So, for example, on the community, on businesses, the cost, who's going to run them, who's going to service them, who's going to upkeep them, where the money's going to come from. I mean, I won't hark back to earlier today because it's quite difficult, but we sent something back for scrutiny because there wasn't enough detail. But we're just about to speak about an amendment which has absolutely zero detail to it. We're talking about theory here, and it's fine if you want to accept a theory, but it is linked to the Gas Place site. Now, the bringer of the original proposition, I don't think is accept an amendment. I'm not sure. So I wasn't sure whether that is a yes, he's not accepting. He's asking for a vote, okay. But it is not clear to me as to what this amendment will do for the original site. I'm trying to desperately form the right questions here. It says about being economically constructive. We have no information, sir, on the economics of how any site will run or any use will run. So how we can say it's economically constructive, I don't know. And this is what we're debating. We're debating the words of the proposition. So I'm unsure as to what it is that we're actually going to be doing with this proposition. And I may not agree with what the decision that was made earlier, but there are people obviously in this assembly who want much more detail on things before they agree to them. But we're about to agree a theory. It's not an ideology because there's nothing behind it, but there's a theory. And if, in the event the site is adopted in a public land publicly owned by a state entity, the expectations in paragraph A should continue to apply under such ownership until development for the long-term use commences. So, the land for Gas Place, I think we're very closer than ever of actually obtaining and being able to do actual work on it. Any obstacle that gets in the way of that will delay that school again. Any obstacle to get in the way. And if we are going to have meanwhile use, and I'll talk about that in the main debate, because I think we have to discuss that fashion that's being purported to here. We have to discuss it very carefully as to what it actually means. So if we don't think carefully about what that means, and I do have to go to the main proposition for that, so then we agree something that is at worst meaningless, and at best, sir, it's something that is simply non-deliverable but sounds nice. And that is not what we want to do in this assembly. So this is one of the amendments that I think to myself, we could accept because we could already do it, so it doesn't make any difference. But I think there's a risk that it gives credibility to a project that does not have the credibility that it purports to. And therefore, I'm struggling to support the amendment, even though as I say, I have a great deal of respect for the Deputy who brought the amendment to the proposition, and his explanation was clear. I think if this was not attached to the Gas Place site, I probably could say, yes, there's a good theory here in terms of, although I think we can already do it, I believe, with planning law, so I don't know why we're having to do that, but this is directly attached to that site. And I don't think this is the right thing to do. I don't think the supposed meanwhile use is the right thing to do in that site. We need to focus on the project that is already there, that should already be delivered, and I'll talk about that in the main proposition, sir. But at the moment, I'm struggling to accept the amendment as well as the main proposition, but I'll come back to that at that time. Thank you, sir.
Thank you. Deputy Scott.
Thank you, sir. I believe that the bringer of the proposition and Deputy Curtis have actually made good points about why meanwhile use might be supported, and the economic reasons and all these things. As is pointed out in the comments of the Council of Ministers, the site currently is a meanwhile use, and they identified just a few months where maybe there could be that capacity. I think to be honest, my main problem, because I actually think all this is positive intention, the idea of just sweating our assets, brilliant. The idea of pop-up things, brilliant, love it. What has caused me difficulty with this proposition, and it's unfortunate because often it just comes down to a slight matter of wording, and then you think, maybe I should have brought an amendment to, or offered one, but it's the actual wording that government shall use it for this purpose. And that's where you actually say, well, okay, you're creating an obligation here, and it's an obligation to do exactly what? What would be this meanwhile use? So generally, I might picture, because I actually think meanwhile use can be used in lots of ways, and indeed with our place strategy, more should be recognised, and I know that this is the view of people, I think I've got the right organisation, like the Jersey Childcare Trust, who envisage that maybe in holiday time, schools might be used more for people who want to play and these things, and all that's well and good. But then there are those practical issues about health and safety, insurance, these things that need to be taken into account when you have a specific project. And in this particular context, there is no specific project. So in a sense, what one wants is communities come up with these ideas and government to embrace them. It's simply that. And I don't see an obstacle to that. But if there is one, it may be at what I might call the high logical level. Is there a problem in planning? Is government doing something where it's just not even engaging with ideas of the community full stop, or even the parish? I don't know. And this is where I have a difficulty, because I can't really support something that's committing to something that's not clear. And it could be that the problem may be somewhere else. So I welcome a bit more for this kind of like expansion on this by both Deputy War and Deputy Curtis as I consider this proposition. Thank you.
Thank you. Does any other member wish to speak on the amendment? Deputy Joseph.
Thank you, sir. I support the proposition of Deputy War, but I'm the Constable of St Helier has, I think, made a very interesting and certainly worthwhile comment that whilst Deputy Curtis, and I agree absolutely with meanwhile use and all the rest of it, and I agree with all of the comments about the state's lamentable record of use of properties, and they're there as legends. The state is not very good, as members know, sir, in making fast decisions on infrastructure projects. And that has been partly because of funding, partly because of disagreements, and the rest of it. And we will come to the Infrastructure Minister's comments, which I have, I think, done a review of, if not a dissection of. And I want to be able to think that I'm reading something, but I can't understand by reconciling the words of the Minister's comments, which do pertain to this underlying issue that we're discussing, because I can't find the budget allocations for the school. And if you don't get a budget allocation, then a head of expenditure, and I was delighted to hear Deputy Gorse yesterday, in questions yesterday to the procurement review, that you won't get any certainty for any site unless you have multi-year budgeting. And one of the things that I most regret in the previous Assembly was doing away with the multi-year budgeting. So effectively, all you've got is a year-to-year certainty of budgets, including capital, and anything written in any subsequent year, unless if you rule otherwise, sir, is basically a pencil that can be rubbed out. There is no certainty of any capital project. So whilst I absolutely understand, and having spent quite a lot of time at St Saviour's, St Luke's area, and seeing I agree with the Education Minister about the problems that he's got with schools, where that doesn't automatically lie, and having been a deputy for St Saviour, St Helier number 3, and having Rouge Bouillon, that's of course a long-standing issue of having not enough outside use in that school. But I'm looking across at my my esteemed successor at with some periods in between, the Treasury Minister. The Treasury Minister is obviously having to do the inevitably incredibly difficult task of putting together all ministerial demands for capital and not being able to please everybody. And I can't see anything in the budget, and I would be most grateful if any minister could say, where is the budget for the primary school, which is the thing that is going to allow or otherwise the meanwhile use? Where is it? Where is it? When is it going to happen? When is it penciled in? I know that the ministers won't want to release any of the budget matters. That's, of course, a matter for the Treasury Minister when she lodges her budget. But where is and when is the school on, is the school on primary, on Gas Place going to happen? If so, where's the money? Because if it isn't in the next 3 or 4 years, then the meanwhile use is really important, because we don't want another situation where we have a rotting, and dare I say, there are lots of examples, sir. The Sailor building, what a mess, what an embarrassment. The state's left a piece by a genuine, thoughtful Jerseyman, leaving his property for the benefit of health, and then the Sailor building lying derelict for years. And of course, there is many, and I've been involved in, whether members like it or not, I've been involved in many trying to get on with certain things, much to people's chagrin sometimes. But we have to be realistic. Is the primary school going to be in the ministers' budgets? If I've missed it, I apologise, but where is it? When's it going to happen? Is it going to be built? And have ministers considered that that's the only site that they're prepared to do? If they want a school, that's fine, but where is it going to happen? So this is the context in which we're making decisions. And we're making a decision, and I don't think I favour the potential non-community use by, if it is, as I'm suspecting, I'm reading the situation, is that the budget allocation for the primary school, which was, by the way, bought by Andium Homes for housing, and somebody's going to have to take the loss of £10 million. The state doesn't own this site yet, sir. Somebody's going to have to take the loss of, I think, 10 million of the site that was bought for housing when I wasn't in this place. And I did think that 10 million or whatever that was bought should be ring-fenced for the purposes of maintaining Jersey's gas supply, but that's another matter. But the issue is that the Andium Homes, who I think it's clear own it, are going to have to be, the state is going to have to buy it, because Andium doesn't build schools. So they're going to have to buy it. They're going to have to compensate Andium for the 10 million and all the losses that they've incurred since then. And then we're going to have a head of expenditure for a, what, 30, 40 million pound school? I can't see this happening anytime soon. And I would prefer a good proposal for a meanwhile community use for this half-used site by, even now, Rock Construction, who's the tenant, and obviously building some great homes in the vicinity. And my final point is going to say, when the facts change, I change my mind, sir. I was one of those that really upset the Constable of St Helier because it took too long because we were trying to get a car park underneath the Millennium Park. There was a binder that slipped, sir. And despite the valiant attempts of the council ministers to hold back and say, come on, we're going to get a car park underneath it, but you'll have your park, Constable, a binder slipped, sir, and the Millennium Park got built without a car park. Well, jolly good. That has proved its worthwhile, and I would remind members, when they're thinking about this commercial use potential that Deputy Curtis is proposing in this amendment, which I can't think I'm going to support, I think it's actually for the community, and I think that unless there is a jolly good reason why, with the amount of development that it is near St Saviour, some of it in St Saviour, it's on St Saviour's Road, there is a need for green lung and open spaces. And I didn't think I would be ever standing in this assembly and saying that in those terms. The Constable and all those movers behind the Millennium Park, yes, I'd like to see a car park underneath it, want to see a green space, but it's needed. And community use of this is absolutely needed. And I would commend Deputy Ward for what he's done, but we'll come to that later. But I don't think, actually, that it's got... I don't think if meanwhile use is going to happen, because it's got to, I think, because it's going to be inevitable, otherwise we're going to have a rotting asset. I think that it should be as unamended by Deputy Ward. But I'm happy to hear the clarity and certainty that the council ministers I know will be able to give us in relation to the primary school funding and whether or not this is an aspiration or a realistic and timed calculation that's got a head of expenditure and the purchase of the site and the rest of it. Thank you, sir.
Thank you. Does any other member wish to speak on the amendment? Deputy Reniff.
Yes, sir. I rise because I do like a challenge. And so I will happily take up the Constable of St Helier's challenge to demolish the Council of Ministers' very weak arguments as put in the paper that accompanied this, as they refer to the amendment. And I do feel for Deputy Curtis here because the debate that we've had so far, despite his very best efforts to be clear about what the debate is about, has strayed all over the place into various areas which have nothing to do with his amendment. But my point about the paper that the Council of Ministers put as it refers to the amendment is there are only two references in that paper from the Council of Ministers to the amendment. Two references. The first says, the Council's concerns regarding the original proposition, particularly around timing, operational constraints and clarity of responsibility, remain equally relevant in the context of the amendment. Well, how can that be? Because, as Deputy Curtis has said, at the very end of the thing, there is a get-out clause in any case. If there's really a problem here, then there is a get-out clause in the amendment. But the timing, operational constraints and clarity of responsibility that they refer to in reference to the original proposition, all those comments related to issues which do not have to apply, because, and we know they don't have to apply, because the current meanwhile use is in use. There is a meanwhile use. It's being done. It's being done without any of these issues which are supposedly in these comments. It's not, you know, there can't be objections because it's already happening. Second reference to it, the Council acknowledges the intention of Deputy Curtis's amendment, which seeks to reinforce the principle that public land should not lie idle. The Council supports the general principle of encouraging productive meanwhile use where feasible and appropriate. Indeed, the current use of the gas place site by Rock Construction to support the delivery of much-needed housing is a good example of this in practice. Sorry, that's supporting what Deputy Curtis is doing. That's saying we agree with it. So I'm afraid the arguments advanced against this amendment just simply don't exist. The amendment is really simple. It broadens out the original proposition to include things which are already happening, so we can't object to those. It creates a get-out clause for the government, but it allows us to state, as an assembly, because it leaves parts of the original proposition in place, that we do like the idea of meanwhile uses, that we strongly believe in the case of gas place, that we should be using it for something. The question about whether it should be a youth use or so on is not in the proposition. It is not in the amendment. It is perhaps slightly unfortunate that the deputy who brought the proposition has made so much of this in the report, but the report is not what is being voted on in the amendment or in the original proposition. It is just about a meanwhile use for gas place. And we have enough of these sites to know, let's make this an example, let's be clear that we support that principle. And I will just draw attention to one thing else, one extra thing that's in the Council of Ministers comments. Enabling works are expected to begin in October 26, approximately 9 months prior to the main construction works. The timeline would allow for a temporary or meanwhile use of the site for a period of approximately 4 to 6 months. Well, that would be great, wouldn't it? And I have to say that I have a very healthy degree of scepticism about whether that timetable will be met, given all the things that have gone on so far in relation to that site, some of which the Education Minister alluded to. But that reinforces the reasons why we would support this amendment, because the current meanwhile use may well run out. In fact, the Council of Ministers admit it will run out, and we may end up with a longer period of void again. This amendment allows that void period to be used for another economic use, if necessary. Could be another building site. Great. That wouldn't be permissible under the original proposition. I really cannot see, why there is an objection to this amendment, which simply loosens the criteria around what a meanwhile use would mean on this site. So I really hope members will accept it, and then we can have a decent debate on a proposition around the meanwhile use for that site. Thank you, sir.
Sir, point of clarification, may the...
Deputy Renner, do you accept the point of clarification? Okay. Deputy Miller.
Thank you, sir. So for the time being, I am just going to say that clearly, as set out in the Council of Ministers comment paper, we don't support the main proposition, and the amendment does not address any of our concerns with the proposition. Therefore, I cannot support the amendment. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Does any other member wish to speak on the amendment? If no other member wishes to speak, I call on Deputy Alex Curtis to reply.
Thank you, sir. I enjoy a brief speech, so I would have wished I could have enjoyed the Treasury Minister's brief response, which is, I feel, unfortunate because Deputy Reniff so clearly went through the comments paper articulating the challenges between what it says and what this amendment does. I feel I've got an uphill battle with members this afternoon, so I will try not to keep us too long. No doubt we'll be back tomorrow. But it's tricky to know where to start. I felt I was making a fairly clear case earlier. I don't like unworkable propositions. I don't like propositions that mean nothing, but I do think sometimes we need to signal in principle intent. And I will walk once through everyone who spoke to give them, to acknowledge them, to acknowledge what they said. But I will start with the main comment about, well, what would these uses be? And to apologise for my language, I don't really care. So I don't mind what these uses are. I hope that's not unparliamentary. There's an easier way to describe what requesting a meanwhile use, if practical, because I've got that get out clause, means. It means don't leave the site vacant. It means don't get to a point where the current user of the site rolls the last vehicle away, takes the last piece of building material away, hands the keys back, and that's it. Nothing happens for, as we heard, 6 months, a year, 2 years. I really am not fighting here for a case that we should have a great economic use or a community use or any investment from government or Andium. What I care about in bringing this amendment is I don't like sites being empty. That means for those who are really being unambitious, they go, okay, what do? We talk to our other delivery contractors and say, right, you're delivering a site. Would using the Gas Place site for a period of 3 months, 4 months, 6 months help with your construction on the Ann Street Brewery site? And they may say, yes, that would be really helpful. The site will be vacant from Rock. The construction company for there will come in, use it for their vehicles. It will save them some time. That's a meanwhile use. It could be parking for other projects around town. It could be all the things people... It's not, I don't think, the Assembly's job to say that. I think it's our job to say that as we know Maison Les Arches as a construction project winds to a close, we know that Rock will be vacating the site. We are prepared. We are ready to say, well, when the keys come back, we've got an idea. We're trying to have an idea to use that site. Because it feels to me, sir, when different government offices were vacated in the move to the Union Street offices, there wasn't a plan for Philip Lefevre House. There wasn't a plan that when the keys were returned, we went, oh, the site's on the market, we know the housing market's changing, could we use that site? Anybody looking for a little excess office capacity on a ground floor? Are we looking to do anything? Could we do anything? Now I see one minister, I won't name them, shaking their head, but the point is we should have those conversations. It's a corporate muscle to flex as Jersey Property Holdings. We know that Jubilee Wharf was vacated and there was there has been a period where that hasn't been occupied. Of course, now we know there are some tenants moving in, which are government bodies. But it's a muscle we should flex. And what I care about is the site not being empty. So to once more run through those who spoke, to really clarify this point, the Constable of St Helier, if his view is finding a meanwhile use should stretch a bit harder, ensure it has a community value, I urge him to vote against this. He's expressed why, as is his right, as why I think it was good to keep the debate separate. Should we be a bit more challenging on the Treasury Minister, or should we really ask, don't be empty? I think I'm very glad he put that forward. To Deputy Rob Ward, likewise to him, I always value his contributions in debate. But he highlights delay of the school and started very clearly on the school being far more important, which, with my pragmatic head on, I thought, well, that's why I've put in a clause saying, whatever we do, don't hold up the development of the school. And I mean that in the proposition. And if I sway the doubtful heads around here, that is what we would be voting for in this amendment. It provides that clause. It further recognises that hopefully the Minister and the government will have ownership of the site soon, because we want to move forward with that project. And as I said in my opening speech, if we are able to move at such pace, there is no real gap between rock leaving and construction starting. I think this Assembly should celebrate that. There will be spades in the ground on that new school, and we should all be very happy. But what if that isn't the case? We need to be ready to just say, well, actually, the principle is don't leave sites empty. Deputy Scott, and also the wording from Deputy Rob Ward talked about the risk that supporting this gives credibility to the project. I just want to be really clear. I'm not talking about a project. We're not spinning up an organisation or a board. We are not talking about a project. We are talking about the development of meanwhile use, which can be as simple as allowing a construction company to use it. So project would sound like we have to create an organisation, create a board to organise stuff. I'll be really clear. The proposition, as worded, if accepting the amendment, is purely about ensuring the site is used. There is no project needed. Just like there isn't a project set up to organise ROC's current use of the site. Deputy Scott, the Deputy's main concern was that government shall was the language. That was my real concern as well, actually, sir. That's why I've amended that sentence. Government shall, ... provided such use does not impede any long-term plans for future development. I'm not proposing this proposition. I'm trying to amend it into something that I think the principle is workable. The Deputy welcomed an expansion on this, and I hope that clarifies, and I will give way at the end on that. Deputy Ozef said he'll come out on one side. Again, that's fantastic. If he wants to push the ministers to have a community meanwhile use, that's great. That's not what I want out of this proposition. I don't want it empty. Deputy Reniff, I thank for being very clear that we're not talking about a project, we're not talking about a specific use. It's about this principle about how do we ensure the expectation on the site is it is not left empty for a prolonged period of time. And Deputy Miller, I had probably as many words as she used in her speech. There's nothing to say. I would really have liked the Council of Ministers to have reflected on this, to see that actually what I've tried to bring forward here is a principle, because even we've heard members and ministers say a proposition on the round about meanwhile use is a good thing. As I said, you have to start somewhere. So with that, no point taking up any more time of the Assembly. If we see that this site is not vacant between ROC's exit and the construction, I will be a very happy person. But if we do, I think we know why we need to set principles, and I think the principle should start here. And I call for the appel.
Deputy Alex Bessis, you were going to accept a point of clarification.
I was from Deputy Scott, of course.
Yes, Deputy Scott.
And thank you. And I would like to thank Deputy Curtis for giving way to me, having been rejected by Deputy Renouf and Deputy Tadier in earlier debates. The point about this this creation of an obligation, the Deputy suggested that he and I appreciate him accepting or at least sharing that concern about creating an obligation, but he said that he created this proviso provided it did not impede any long-term plans for future development. Had the, what I'd like him to clarify is whether he considered that, notwithstanding whether it got in the way of long-term development not, that when you say shall, it creates an obligation to find a use, and that may in itself be putting an obligation on government to actually do something, which, in the lack of ideas or even suggestions, is, asking government to do more rather than have community come to it with some sort of idea. It's actually saying, you will do this, rather than consider this.
Deputy Alex Curtis, is there anything you wish to clarify?
Well, I can clarify that. I actually felt an even broader principle should be, and I tried to take this in three parts, A, B and C. Feedback from the GREF was there needed to be something tangible. However, I'm just thinking, most legislation, most things we do, if you include the word except, it's not 100% of the time something shall be done. Something shall be done except when, and I used the phrase subject that, it's an exception clause. And I think whether there's a ruling needed, I think an exception clause is a fairly standard term to use to ensure you're not creating perverse consequences by your actions. I felt the use of an except or subject to or such that are all things that say shall, but common sense prevails here, given the overriding public interest test on this site is to develop a school without delay. I hope that clarifies the matter.
Sir, could I just ask the Solicitor General for his position on this? No?
I don't think if it's a question about the wording of the proposition, I'm not sure that's a question for the Solicitor General. That'd be a question for the Chair.
So the debate is finished, as I understand it. That was a point of clarification.
Yes, that was the point of clarification that has been addressed. So we move to the Pell. So I invite members to return to their seats, which I think all members have, and I ask the greffier to open the voting. All members have cast their votes. I ask the greffier to close the voting, please. And I can announce that the amendment has been rejected. There were 16 votes pour, 26 votes contre, and no abstentions.
Could I have the name, sir?
Yes, greffier, please, can we have the names of those who voted each way?
Pour, Connétable of St Lawrence, Connétable of Trinity, Connétable of Grouville, Connétable of St One, Connétable of St Mary, Deputy Dublé, Deputy Ayer, Deputy Gardner, Deputy War, Deputy Miles, Deputy Renoff, Deputy Jearn, Deputy Alex Curtis, Deputy Barbara Ward, Deputy Stevenson, and Deputy War Online. And then...
I think that was Deputy Moore online.
Moore, sorry. Deputy Moore online. Apologies. And contre, Connétable St Helier, Connétable St Peter, Connétable St Mary, Connétable St John, Connétable St Saviour, Deputy Southern, Deputy Labby, Deputy Tadier, Deputy Lahegrat, Deputy Rob Ward, Deputy Lyndon Farnham, Deputy Mesick, Deputy Ozoff, Deputy Coles, Deputy Scott, Deputy Catherine Curtis, Deputy Feltham, Deputy Binet, Deputy Miller, Deputy Howell, Deputy Tom Binet, Deputy Ferry, Deputy Wilson, Deputy Andrews, Deputy Elves and Deputy Porre.
Thank you very much.
We did a little bit of overtime at lunchtime, so I wonder if I might propose the adjournment 2 minutes early.
So would it be, can I just ask a question for the continuation of the debate for tomorrow, just about the funding of the primary school, which seems relevant? Could ministers circulate kindly where the funding is, and is it there?
Thank you, Deputy, thank you.
So I can answer that?
No.
Okay.
You will have an opportunity tomorrow.
You're very firm, sir. Thank you.
Yeah, you will have an opportunity tomorrow when the debate resumes on the proposition. The adjournment has been proposed. The adjournment seconded. Yes. Members happy to adjourn. We adjourn till 9:30 tomorrow morning.
The government.